Some people enter your life like a collision, sudden, violent, and impossible to forget. 10 years ago, a stranger pulled a dying woman from the wreckage of a storm and made her a promise before disappearing into the rain. She survived. She searched. And on an ordinary Tuesday evening in a city park, fate finally collected its debt. If you've ever believed that one single moment can change the entire direction of your life, stay with me until the end of this story. Like and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. The park was loud in the way only city parks could be loud at 6:15 on a Tuesday. Not with peace, but with the particular chaos of people escaping their offices all at once. Joggers cutting through pedestrian traffic, pigeons scattering from benches, a hot dog cart vendor arguing with someone over change. Ethan Cross moved through all of it like a man who'd learned to navigate the world at a permanent low-grade sprint. He was late, not catastrophically late, not yet. But the margin between fine and very much not fine was closing with every step, and Ethan had learned two things from 4 years of single fatherhood. Margins mattered, and children who'd been told 5 more minutes 17 times in 1 week eventually stopped believing you. Emma was 7. She had her mother's eyes, this dark, patient brown that somehow managed to look both warm and quietly accusatory at the same time. And she had developed a habit of waiting by the front window of the after-school center with her coat already zipped and her backpack already on her shoulders. Like she was always bracing herself for something. Ethan hated that. He hated that he was probably the reason for it. His phone buzzed in his pocket. The after-school center. He knew without looking. He answered without stopping. "I'm in the park," he said. 7 minutes. "Mr. Cross, we close at 6:30? 7 minutes, he said again, and tucked the phone back in his pocket. The shortcut through the park saved him 4 minutes on a good day, 3 on an average one, and absolutely nothing when someone was feeding the ducks wrong and caused a full pedestrian pileup near the East Fountain. Ethan dodged left around a couple taking photos of themselves in front of the water jets, swung wide to avoid a golden retriever who'd decided the middle of the path was an excellent napping location, and was halfway to the other side of the fountain plaza when he saw her. She was on a bench, one of the green iron ones that ran along the fountain's perimeter, and she was bent over her foot, fighting with the strap of her shoe in a way that communicated both urgency and a complete unwillingness to accept defeat. She was dressed in a charcoal blazer over a silk blouse, dark slacks that were very clearly expensive, and heels that were not designed for fighting with, which was probably the root cause of the current problem. The buckle on the ankle strap had come loose, and the shoe was hanging half off her foot at a bad angle. She'd end up twisting her ankle if she put weight on it like that. Ethan was already behind schedule. He knew this. His brain processed the situation with the clarity of someone who'd had to make dozens of small parenting calculations every day for 4 years. Who needs what? What costs what? Where's the line between helpful and late and irresponsible? The math was simple. He didn't have time to stop. He stopped. "Hey, hold on," he said, already crouching down in front of the bench. "Don't put weight on it. The buckle's caught wrong." The woman's head came up fast. She looked startled, like she'd been so focused on the shoe that she'd shut out the rest of the world. Up close, she was younger than he'd first registered, maybe 30, maybe a year or two either side, with dark hair pulled back into a knot that had been neat maybe 6 hours ago and was now collecting stray pieces around her face. She had the kind of features that were striking without being soft, the kind of face that looked like it had learned to be careful. There were shadows under her eyes that good concealer couldn't entirely fix. "I can," she started. "The pin's behind the leather," Ethan said, already working the strap. "If you force it, it'll break. Just here." He eased the buckle free, rethreaded the strap through the proper slot, and pressed it down. It caught. Clean. Done. The whole thing took 45 seconds. He started to stand up. "Thank you," she said. And then she didn't say anything else for a moment, which made him pause, which was the moment that changed everything, because she was staring at him. Not in the casual, politely grateful way of someone who'd just had a stranger help with a minor inconvenience. She was staring at him the way people stare at something they've been trying to remember for a very long time and have suddenly, without warning, remembered. Her lips were slightly parted. The color had gone from her face. "You okay?" Ethan asked. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes moved across his face with an attention that was specific, not general, taking in the jaw, the brow line, the set of his eyes, the way you check a photograph against the real thing. "I'm sorry," she said, and her voice was different now, quieter. I'm sorry, this is your hands." She exhaled something that was almost a laugh, except it wasn't. "The way you just did that, with your hands." "The buckle?" "When you held the strap, you pinched it from the outside in." She was shaking slightly. Ethan could see it in her shoulders. "You always do that, don't you? Work from the outside in. Keep the tension even." He stared at her. "Have we met?" The question seemed to hit her somewhere complicated. Her jaw moved, but the words took a moment to organize themselves, and when they came with everything. The control she'd been holding going quietly sideways, eyes going bright and wet in the space of a single breath. 10 years ago, she said. Route 9 outside of Millhaven, November. There was a storm. Ethan went still. There was a car accident, she continued. A bad one. I was in the passenger seat. The car went off the embankment and into the ditch, and I was trapped, and there was water coming in, and I thought... She stopped, pressed her lips together. You pulled the door. You couldn't get it all the way open, but you got your arm through and you held my hand. You talked to me. You said my name wasn't going to be on any list tonight. She gave a small, broken exhale. I don't know where that came from, but you said it. Ethan said nothing. His chest was doing something uncomfortable. And when I finally came to in the hospital, she said, and I asked the nurses about you, they didn't know who I was talking about. You were gone before the ambulances got there, and she blinked hard. I've been looking, on and off, for years. I know how that sounds, but I've been looking. He sat down on the bench. Not for dramatic effect. His legs just made the decision for him. I remember the accident, he said, quietly. I was driving through on my way back from a site job. The storm was bad enough that visibility was basically nothing. I saw the car go off the shoulder. He paused. You had a broken collarbone, and there was glass in your hair. You kept saying your mother's name. She let out a sound that was half laugh and half something it would have been rude to name out loud. Her hand came up to cover her mouth. Her eyes were wet. Elena, she said. You kept saying Elena. That's my mother. She pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of her nose and held them there for a second, steadying herself. I'm Victoria. Victoria Sterling. Ethan, he said. Ethan Cross. She extended her hand, which was a nearly absurd formality given what had just happened, but Ethan took it, and they shook, and it was somehow exactly the right thing to do because it gave them both a moment to breathe like normal people. You said, she started, then stopped. Before the ambulances came, you said, stay alive. I'll find you. He was quiet for a moment. I remember. I know you couldn't have meant it literally. She looked at him directly. But I never forgot it. It was the thing I held on to in the hospital. It was the thing I held on to for a long time. How long were you in the hospital? 3 weeks. Then 3 months of physical therapy. She glanced down at her hands. I cracked 2 vertebrae. There was some nerve damage in my left leg. I walk with a slight limp when I'm tired, which is why the heel thing was... I was being stupid about the shoes today. I always think I can manage better than I can. She said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity, the way someone describes a recurring mechanical problem with a car. Familiar, integrated, not particularly charged. He found himself respecting that. People who'd been through something hard and didn't perform it wore it differently. Victoria Sterling wore it like that. His phone buzzed again. He looked at it. The after-school center, second call. I'm sorry, he said, standing. I have to go. My daughter's... Of course. She stood too, quickly, readjusting the strap on her heeled shoe. Of course, I'm sorry. I know this is strange. I know this is a lot to drop on someone. I'm not... She exhaled. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that I found you, that you mattered. She looked at him with a steadiness that cost her something. Whatever else, you mattered. Ethan stood there with his phone buzzing and his feet pointed in the direction of the park's east exit, and every logical component of his day demanding that he move. "My daughter's name is Emma," he said. "She's 7. She has her mother's eyes, and she's waiting for me with her backpack on, and she does that thing where she doesn't say she's upset. She just gets very still and polite, and it's worse than if she cried." He took a breath. "I'll be at this park tomorrow evening. Same time. I walk through here every day after work." Victoria looked at him. "If you want to finish this conversation," he said, "I'll be here." He turned and went. He didn't look back. He had Emma to get to. But he walked differently for the rest of the evening, and he couldn't have explained why. Octave. Emma was in fact waiting by the front window with her backpack on when he arrived at 6:28. One of the staff, a young woman named Priya, who'd been there since Emma started, gave him the look. The one that said, "You're technically fine, but you should know I have feelings about this." Ethan apologized, meant it, and crouched down to his daughter's level. "You hungry?" Emma considered the question with the gravity of a UN negotiator. "Kind of." "Thai or burgers?" "Thai." "Thai," he agreed, and took her hand, and they walked out into the evening. She didn't ask why he was weird and quiet on the way home, because Emma had developed a child's intuition about when to push and when to leave things alone. She ate her pad see-ew at the kitchen table and told him about a disagreement at recess involving a disputed handball call and a girl named Sophie who apparently never admits anything. And Ethan listened and asked the right questions and was mostly present. After she was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee and let himself think about Route 9. He'd been 22. Just finished a site visit for the construction firm he was working for at the time, running behind because he always ran behind back then, cutting through the storm because he didn't want to wait it out. He'd seen the taillights go sideways, seen the car drop off the shoulder into the drainage ditch, and he'd been out of his truck before he'd consciously made any decision about it. The car had been half in the ditch, the driver's side door crunched against the embankment, the passenger window spiderwebbed but still holding. He'd gone around to the passenger side, pulled at the door until it gave enough to get his arm through. The woman inside, girl really, she couldn't have been older than 19 or 20, had been conscious but drifting, her head against the crumpled dashboard, saying her mother's name over and over like it was the only word she had left. He'd taken her hand. He'd talked to her. He'd said whatever came to him, things you say when you're 22 and terrified, and someone is leaning on you and you have no idea if you're enough. He'd heard the sirens when they were still half a mile out. By then she'd gripped his hand back and stopped saying the name. Her eyes had focused. She'd looked at him and said, "Don't let go." "I'm not letting go," he'd said. He hadn't let go until the paramedics were there and they'd told him to move. And then he'd moved, and someone had put a thermal blanket around his shoulders, and he'd stood in the rain and watched them load her into the ambulance. And when a police officer asked him for a statement, he'd given one. And then he'd driven home. He'd thought about her for a while afterward. He'd called the regional hospital twice, gotten nowhere, and eventually let the worry quiet into hope. Which was a coward's move, maybe, but he'd been 22 and he hadn't known what else to do with it. Then life had continued. He'd met Sarah 3 years later, married her at 26. Emma was born the year after. Sarah got sick when Emma was 2 and fought it like she fought everything, with a stubbornness that Ethan had found equal parts maddening and beautiful. And she'd lost the fight 2 years later, a week before Emma's 4th birthday, and Ethan had reorganized everything he was around the fact of raising their daughter alone. Grief was a room you kept walking through. You didn't stop entering it, you just got better at crossing it. "Victoria Sterling," he said the name aloud in the empty kitchen, quietly, like testing whether it was real. CEO, he'd noticed from the lanyard still hanging from her blazer pocket, some corporate badge she hadn't tucked away yet. The silk blouse, the quality of the blazer, the particular manner of someone used to being deferred to, softened at the edges by whatever the park bench had just required of her. She'd come apart, but she'd done it quietly, like someone who'd learned that falling to pieces in public cost you things. He wasn't sure what he expected from a second conversation. He wasn't sure he expected anything. He washed out his coffee mug, checked on Emma one last time. She was face down in her pillow the way she always slept, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm, her shoes still on because she'd fallen asleep before he could get to them, and took them off carefully, and pulled the blanket up. Then he went to bed, and for the first time in a long time, it took a while to sleep. Victoria was there when he walked through the park the next evening. Same bench. She was in different clothes. Another blazer, dark green this time, with a laptop bag over her shoulder that suggested she'd come straight from the office. She had a coffee from the cart near the east entrance, and she looked like she'd spent the previous 24 hours deciding exactly how much of herself she was willing to put on a park bench. Ethan sat down next to her. She handed him the second coffee, which she'd apparently bought on the assumption he'd show, which he found both presumptuous and efficient. "I looked you up," she said, without preamble. "I figured. Construction project manager, single father, lived in this neighborhood for 6 years," he said. "Your wife's name was Sarah." She said it carefully, not as information, but as acknowledgement. "Yeah. I'm sorry." "She'd hate being talked about carefully," he said. "She was the least careful person I've ever known. She spray-painted this driveway once because she thought the pavers were, and I'm quoting, a depressing shade of gray." He took a sip of the coffee. The landlord was furious. Victoria smiled. It changed her face and took some of the guardedness out of it. "She sounds like someone good to know." She was. She was exhausting and loud, and she burned everything she cooked. And she thought being 30 minutes late was functionally the same as being on time, and she was... He stopped. "Yeah, she was good." "How old was Emma?" 4 when she died. She's 7 now. He looked over. "You looked me up." "You're not particularly hard to find. You have a LinkedIn." "My colleague made it for me. I've never logged in." "That's apparent," Victoria said. They sat for a moment with the fountain doing its thing in front of them and the park noise moving around them, and it wasn't uncomfortable, which was strange given the circumstances. "Tell me about the accident," Ethan said. "Not about him. About her." "What happened before I got there?" She held the coffee cup in both hands. "It was my college roommate's wedding. I was the maid of honor. I'd been there the night before, at the rehearsal dinner, and I'd stayed over, and I was driving back the next morning to pick up my mother from the airport." She paused. "I was on Route 9 because my GPS was wrong. It kept routing me through Millhaven, which added 20 minutes, and I was already annoyed about it. There was a deer, that's all. One deer stepping off the shoulder. I swerved, overcorrected." She exhaled. "I was 19. I'd had my license for less than a year. The car went sideways and then it went down." "Were you alone in the car?" "Yes." She paused. The driver's side was against the embankment, so it was actually better than if I'd been alone in a different position. But the water was coming in from somewhere, a seam, I think. And it was cold, and I couldn't get the door open, and after a few minutes I stopped trying to get the door open. "You were going quiet," Ethan said, "when I got to you." "I know." She said it simply. "I was deciding. Not deliberately, but I was deciding." He understood what she meant. And then someone grabbed my hand and said, "Your name is not going to be on any list tonight," she said. And I thought, okay, so I'm staying, just like that. It was that straightforward. She turned to look at him. "Do you know how strange that is? 10 years of building something, a company, a career, a life. And when I trace it back, when I follow the thread, it goes all the way back to some guy who was annoyed by the storm and stopped anyway." "I wasn't annoyed by the storm," Ethan said. "Were you scared?" "Yes." "You didn't sound scared." "I was 22, he said. "I was terrified. But you were already quiet, and I thought if you heard scared, you'd get quieter. So I talked about everything except being scared." She looked at him steadily for a moment. "What did you talk about?" He thought. "I think I talked about the job site I'd been at. Something about a concrete pour that had gone badly. I don't actually remember the specifics. I just kept talking." Victoria did the laugh that wasn't quite a laugh again, softer this time. "It worked," she said. "You held on," he said. "That was you." "We can disagree about that." They drank their coffee. The sun was doing its thing through the trees, going sideways and orange, and somewhere behind them a kid was having a passionate dispute with a parent about whether or not they had to leave, and Ethan thought distantly that he related to both parties. "I should pick up Emma," he said. "What time?" 20 minutes. "Tell me about her," Victoria said. So he told her about Emma. He talked for the better part of 15 minutes about the handball dispute and the girl Sophie who never admitted anything, about the stuffed rabbit named Professor Cottontail, whose origin story Emma had never fully explained, about the way Emma made decisions like she was calculating odds, about the shoes. He talked about his daughter the way parents talk about their kids, when someone actually wants to hear it, all the small specific things that pile up into a person. He didn't edit or perform. He just talked. Victoria listened the way people listen when they're actually listening, not waiting for a gap to fill, but tracking the thing being said, following its shape. She sounds like she's going to make someone's life very difficult when she's older, she said finally. She makes my life very difficult right now, Ethan said, and I'm grateful for every second of it. He stood. She stood. Same time tomorrow? Victoria asked. She said it with the directness of someone who'd decided to stop being careful about it. He thought for a moment. He was a man who'd learned to be suspicious of things that moved too fast. He'd also learned, through 4 years of raising a daughter alone, that careful and closed were not the same thing, and that he'd been conflating them for too long. Same time tomorrow, he said. In ban. It became their version of a routine before either of them acknowledged it as such. The park at 6:15, the bench by the fountain, 1 coffee each from the cart near the east entrance. She always bought them on the assumption he'd show, which he always did, and after the first week he started bringing the coffees instead, which she accepted with no commentary other than checking that he'd gotten her order right. He had. He'd paid attention the first time. They talked in the strange, telescoped way of people who are catching up on time they didn't realize was shared, trading stories, filling in gaps, occasionally disagreeing about small things with an ease that surprised him. Victoria had opinions about everything, stated them without apology, and expected him to push back when he disagreed, which he learned to do without softening it too much. She had no patience for people who soften things to manage her reaction, which he found, after a lifetime of managing other people's feelings, almost aggressively refreshing. She'd grown up in the city. Her father had left when she was 12. Her mother, Elena, the name she'd repeated in the wreck, had worked 2 jobs consistently and had managed to make it feel not like sacrifice, but like strategy. Victoria had inherited the strategy. She'd started her first company at 24, sold it at 26, and built the current one from the proceeds and a specific, stubborn vision that her first investors had largely told her was unrealistic. It was now valued at somewhere north of $800 million, which she mentioned once, matter-of-factly, in the context of explaining a business decision, and did not return to. She didn't talk about money the way people who liked talking about money talked about it. She talked about it like a carpenter talks about materials, as context, not identity. What she did talk about when she talked about herself at all was the work, the architecture of it, the decision trees, the people she'd had to fire and why, the competitors she respected and the ones she didn't, the specific texture of what it felt like to push something from idea to reality. She was precise about it, almost clinical, and then occasionally a phrase would slip through, something about the color of the first office, or the way it felt the morning of the first major contract, that gave the whole thing warmth and dimension. Ethan was not a complicated man in the way people sometimes meant that. He didn't confuse simple for shallow. He knew how to do things. He understood systems. He could look at a construction site and read it, see where it was going wrong, anticipate the problem 6 steps before it emerged. He had a mind like that. Structural, sequential, good at holding a lot of moving parts without losing track. He'd just applied it, for 4 years, almost entirely to the mechanics of raising Emma. It had been a long time since he'd had a conversation that required all of him. He'd forgotten what that felt like. The bench conversation stretched from 15 minutes to 30, then 45. One evening, they were still there when it got dark, and Ethan had to call Priya and apologize, and he walked home through the park at 7:30, feeling like he'd misplaced time somewhere and couldn't find it objectionable. Emma noticed, of course. Emma noticed everything. She didn't say anything for the first week and a half, just tracked the shift in him the way kids track shifts in their parents, quietly, sideways, without directly addressing it. Then one evening, while they were eating dinner, she said without looking up from her plate, "Are you seeing someone?" Ethan choked on his water. "Where did you learn to ask that?" Emma considered this. Sophie's mom asked Sophie's dad that. What did Sophie's dad say? He said no, but then 6 weeks later there was a lady at pickup. Emma ate a forkful of rice. I want to know before 6 weeks. We're just talking, Ethan said. We're friends. Emma looked at him with her mother's eyes, and the thing about Sarah's eyes was that they hadn't been particularly tolerant of imprecision. What's her name? Emma asked. Victoria. Does she have kids? No. Does she like kids? I think so. I don't... He stopped. He actually didn't know. He'd talked about Emma in detail. He hadn't thought to ask Victoria what she thought about children in the abstract. I think she does. Emma considered this the way she considered most things, thoroughly, with a slight frown that meant the gears were turning. Okay, she said finally. Okay? You can keep talking to her. Emma returned to her rice with the air of someone who'd made a decision and was done with it. Ethan stared at his 7-year-old for a long moment. Thank you for your approval, he said. You're welcome, said Emma. The Saturday 3 weeks in, the system changed. Victoria texted him at noon. They'd exchanged numbers sometime in the second week, which had also not been formally acknowledged, and asked if he and Emma wanted to walk through the botanical garden. It was a weekend, she said. No benches required. He'd stared at his phone for a while. This was a different thing. The bench was contained, finite, wrapped in the logic of his commute. The botanical garden was an excursion. The botanical garden was making a choice. He texted back. She likes turtles. They have a pond there. Victoria. I know, I checked. He showed Emma the message. Emma read it twice. She checked, Emma said. She did. Emma put the phone down with the specific satisfaction of a child whose research parameters have been met. Okay. The botanical garden was better than Ethan expected and more complicated than he'd prepared for. Emma, to her credit, did not perform good behavior. She was just herself, thoughtful and specific and occasionally blunt in ways that made Victoria go very still for a second before responding. She told Victoria within the first 10 minutes that she liked her jacket, but that the color was wrong for her because it was the kind of green that makes your face look like paper. Victoria stood there for a moment, then said, You're correct. I bought it because it was on sale. Emma nodded as if this was a satisfactory explanation. They were okay after that. Not friends, not yet, but something had cleared. They walked the long path around the turtle pond, Emma running ahead to press her face against the railing and catalog the turtles with the seriousness of a herpetologist. Victoria walked next to Ethan at a pace that accommodated her left leg on the uneven paths. He noticed, didn't say anything, just kept the pace. And they talked in the comfortable, shorthand way they'd developed on the bench. She's the most serious child I've ever met, Victoria said. She gets it from her mother, Ethan said. Does she? Victoria looked at him sideways. Sarah was the opposite of me. I can improvise. Sarah had to think everything through. Emma's like that. He watched Emma count turtles, mouthing the numbers. She's got my eyes, though. She does, Victoria said. She watches everything. Does that bother you? No? Victoria was quiet for a second. I think I'm being evaluated. You absolutely are. How am I doing? You admitted the jacket was a mistake, Ethan said. That was a good move. Victoria smiled at the path in front of her. I'll keep that in mind. Emma showed back up from the railing and fell into step beside them, her hands clasped behind her back in the particular way she walked when she was thinking. After a moment, she said, addressing Victoria directly, Do you know about turtles? Some things, Victoria said. Not as much as you, I'd guess. I know a lot, Emma confirmed without arrogance. The big ones can live for 100 years. That's more than people. That's a long time to be a turtle. I think they like it, Emma said, with the certainty of someone who had considered the matter seriously. They don't have to do as much. Victoria looked at Ethan. He looked back. Neither of them said anything, but something passed between them. Amusement and warmth and the slight specific surprise of an afternoon going better than expected. The afternoon stretched. They had sandwiches on a bench near the greenhouse, Emma eating with one hand and reading a turtle fact card she'd gotten from the gift shop with the other. The sun was at the good angle. Victoria had taken off the wrong green jacket, and without it she looked easier somehow, less assembled. "Tell me something no one at your company knows about you," Ethan said. Victoria looked at him. "That's a strange question." "I know." She thought about it for a while, and he let her, watching Emma read about box turtles. "I can't swim," Victoria said. "Never learned. My mother was afraid of water. I think it transferred. I've taken lessons twice, and I can't." "You almost drowned in that ditch," Ethan said. "I know." She paused. "It probably didn't help." "No. I'm fine with water generally. Showers, baths, being near it. I just can't make my body trust it enough to float." She said it with the same tone she'd used for the limp. Practical, clear-eyed, without theater. "It's annoying, but it's not the worst thing." "No," Ethan agreed. "What about you?" He thought, "I can't read sheet music. Can't. I've tried. My brain does not speak that language." "But you can read blueprints." "Blueprints, absolutely. Sheet music, not a chance. Emma's been taking piano for 8 months, and she's already better than me at reading it." "Does that bother you?" He considered it honestly. "Little bit." Victoria smiled. Not the careful smile, the other one. The one that reached her eyes and was slightly crooked on the left side, as if it had come up too fast to be shaped. "That's a very human thing to admit." "I'm a human being," he said. "Some people aren't, functionally." She glanced at him. "You actually are." He didn't know exactly what she meant. He thought he understood it, though. Git. Emma fell asleep on the drive home, which she would deny having done when she woke up. Ethan carried her in and got her into bed without the shoes. He was getting faster at that, and came back downstairs to find a text from Victoria on his phone. She counted 11 turtles. She told me their names before we left. She named them herself, on the spot, so they'd have names. He looked at it for a while. "Emma does that," he typed back. "She thinks unnamed things are sad." "She's right," Victoria wrote. "She usually is." A pause. Then, "Thank you for today." He put the phone down and looked at the ceiling and let himself think, very deliberately and carefully, about what he was feeling. It had been 4 years since he'd felt like anything but a father and a foreman and a functioning grief. He'd been fine with that. He'd had Emma. He'd had work. He'd had the practical machinery of a life running the way it was supposed to run. And he'd told himself that was enough. And mostly, he'd believed it. Mostly. He was a man who knew how to read a sight and see where something was going before it got there. He could read the current situation well enough to know where it was headed. And the honest thing, the thing he sat with quietly in his kitchen with the lights low and Emma asleep upstairs, was that the direction didn't frighten him. That was the part he hadn't expected. He picked up his phone. "Same time Monday?" he typed. Victoria's reply came in under a minute. "I'll have the coffees." He put the phone down, rinsed his glass, and went to bed. He didn't take long to fall asleep. The Monday coffee was a flat white, which was what he'd ordered the first time and every time since, and Victoria had it ready on the bench armrest when he came through the east gate at 6:17. She was on a call when he arrived, phone pressed to her ear, one hand moving through the air in the clipped, decisive way she gestured when she was solving something rather than discussing it, and she held up a single finger without looking at him. 1 minute. He sat down, took the coffee, and watched the fountain do its thing. She wrapped the call in 40 seconds. Whatever the problem was, she'd handled it. "Sorry," she said, pocketing the phone. "Don't be." He nodded toward the coffee. "You got the milk ratio right this time." "I always get the milk ratio right." "Last Thursday you got oat milk." "The cart was out of regular." She said it without apology. "You survived." He had, technically, survived. He didn't push it. They settled into the rhythm they'd built over the past 3 weeks, not the careful, circling rhythm of people still learning where the edges were, but something easier than that. Conversation that moved the way it moved between people who'd already cleared most of the preliminary terrain. He told her about the site he was managing on the other side of the city, a mixed-use development that was 6 weeks behind schedule because a subcontractor had walked off the job over a payment dispute. She asked three very precise questions about the contract structure, and when he answered them, she said, "Your project lead is wrong about the penalty clause. It's discretionary, not mandatory. You have room." "You read construction contracts?" "I read all kinds of contracts." She said it without drama. "Send me the relevant section if you want a second opinion." He probably would, he realized, which was a strange thing. Not the offer, but the fact that he trusted it without needing her to prove anything. What he'd come to understand about Victoria Sterling over the course of these bench evenings was that her precision was not performance. She was like that about everything, all the way down. She didn't say things she wasn't confident of. She didn't make promises she'd already decided not to keep. And when she was wrong about something, which happened occasionally, the way it happened with anyone who had opinions, she said so without the kind of elaborate defensive maneuvering that made being wrong into an event. She just said it and moved on, which was rarer than it should have been in Ethan's experience. He'd met a lot of people in construction and project management who had that particular skill of making their uncertainty invisible, making their mistakes someone else's problem. Victoria was the opposite. She put her cards on the table and expected you to do the same. He was doing the same. He could feel himself doing it. "Emma asked about you," he said, a few minutes into the conversation. Victoria looked over. "What did she ask?" "Whether you like children, in the abstract." He paused. "I told her I thought so. I realized afterward I'd just assumed." Victoria was quiet for a second. He couldn't read the pause, something moving in it that she hadn't decided to put into words yet. "When I was 27, she said, I was in a relationship. 2 years. He wanted kids. I said I did too, because I thought I did. I thought it was one of those things you grow into wanting." She looked at the fountain. "When we broke up, I was mostly relieved, and I thought about why, and I decided that I'd never actually wanted a child so much as I'd wanted the idea of it to be true. The picture. The particular version of my life it implied." She paused. "That felt like something important to know about myself. And now? Now I'm 30. She glanced at him. "I still don't know if I want children in the abstract. I know that Emma is a specific, concrete, very unusual person, and I like her specifically." She held his look. "That feel like an honest answer?" "Yeah," he said. "It does." What it also felt like was someone deciding to tell him the complicated version instead of the comfortable one, and he was learning that this was how Victoria operated when she trusted you. Not with warmth exactly, but with accuracy. It was its own kind of thing. He let the silence sit for a moment, then, "She's named 12 of the turtles at the botanical garden. She texted me the complete list last night, with descriptions." Victoria's mouth curved. "She texted you a list?" "She does this. When she's very serious about something, she makes a list." He shook his head. "She has a notes app on her tablet. It's extensive." "Gee, what was my turtle called?" He'd wondered if she'd ask. "Barnaby," he said, because he was the biggest and had a dignified face. Victoria sat with that for a moment. "I'll take it," she said. The thing about their evenings was that they'd become the hinge of his day, the fixed point that everything else oriented around, in a way he hadn't noticed building until it was already built. He didn't examine it too closely. He'd learned from Sarah that examining something good too early was a reliable way to make it strange, but it was harder not to notice when Emma started noticing too. It happened in the 5th week. He'd come home later than usual. Victoria had mentioned an investment decision she was wrestling with, something about a logistics company she'd been eyeing for acquisition, and the conversation had stretched past 7 and he'd lost track of it. And Emma was already home, having been picked up by their neighbor Mrs. Kowalski, who had a key and a standing offer and made excellent pierogi. Emma was at the kitchen table when he came in, doing homework with the focused silence that meant she'd decided the homework was not particularly interesting, but was doing it anyway. "You're late," she said. "I know. I'm sorry." He set his bag down. "How was school?" "Fine." Sophie admitted she'd been wrong about the handball call. "That's a development." "It took her 3 weeks." Emma paused her pencil. "Were you with Victoria?" "We were talking. I lost track of time." Emma nodded slowly, looking at her homework with an expression that was doing a lot of work. You lose track of time with her, she said. It wasn't an accusation, it was an observation, delivered with the precision of a scientist noting an anomaly. Sometimes, he said, you don't lose track of time with other people. He thought about disputing this and couldn't. No, he said. I don't. Emma wrote something in her notebook. Let the subject sit there in the air between them, complete and sufficient. He made them pasta for dinner, which he was competent at, and they ate, and he listened to the full story of Sophie's admission, which had involved a third-party arbitration by a girl named Dominique and had apparently required 2 recesses to resolve. Emma was a thorough narrator. She'd gotten that from Sarah. After dinner, while Emma was in the bath, Ethan texted Victoria. Emma has decided to start tracking my time management. Results? Pending review. She's thorough. I know. A pause. Tell her Barnaby is thinking of her. He put the phone in his pocket and thought that whatever this was, it was moving whether he was examining it or not. It was the 6th week when he introduced them directly, properly, intentionally, with Emma informed in advance and given the choice. He'd asked Emma if she wanted to have dinner with Victoria at a restaurant, the 3 of them, and Emma had thought about it the way she thought about most things, with her eyes slightly unfocused and her lips pressed together, running calculations he wasn't privy to. Then she'd said, "The Italian place near the park? If you want." "She'll need to order something she actually likes," Emma said, "not something she thinks is polite." "I'll tell her." He had in fact relayed this. Victoria had texted back, "Tell Emma I order exactly what I want. I've never ordered something to be polite in my life." He had in fact found this very easy to believe. The Italian place near the park was neither expensive nor remarkable. Red checkered tablecloths, candles in wine bottles, a laminated menu with photos, and it was precisely right for the occasion because there was nothing about it that required anyone to perform. Emma ordered the gnocchi after asking the waiter 3 specific questions about how it was made. Victoria ordered the ossobuco without looking at the price and without making anything of it. Ethan ordered the thing he always ordered, which was a pasta that came with too much sausage, and ate it the way he always ate it, which was too fast. The conversation at dinner was different from the bench conversations because Emma was in it. She participated the way she participated in most conversations with adults, not deferentially, not performing, but as a full party, asking what she wanted to know and saying what she actually thought. She asked Victoria how a company worked at a basic level. Victoria explained it. Hired people, made decisions, money went in and came out. The goal was to make more come out than went in. And Emma listened, then said, "But what makes it yours?" Victoria went still for a moment. The question had been too precise for her to bat away. "The decisions," Victoria said. "When something goes wrong, it's mine. When something goes right, it's mine. The thing I was trying to make is either real or it isn't, and I'm the reason for whichever." Emma considered this. Like when Dad says a sight is his problem. Ethan looked up from his pasta. "He says that when something goes wrong," Emma said. "He says, this is my problem now. I think that's the same as what you're saying." Victoria looked at Ethan. "I think it is," she said. Something settled at that table. Not dramatically, not with ceremony, just the quiet shift of a weight that had been uncertain finding its balance. Emma ate her gnocchi. Victoria ate her ossobuco. Ethan ate his sausage pasta too fast, same as always, and nobody required anything to be different. On the walk home, just Ethan and Emma, Victoria having headed in the opposite direction, toward the parking garage where her driver was waiting, Emma walked with her hands clasped behind her back and said nothing for most of a block. Then, "She's not what I thought." "What did you think?" "That she'd be like Mrs. Patterson at school, very correct." Emma frowned at the sidewalk. "She's not correct. She just says what she thinks." "Is that better?" Emma considered it. "Yes," she said. "Correct people are hard to trust." He thought about that for the rest of the walk home. He thought about it after Emma was in bed. He thought about how a 7-year-old had said something true that it had taken him until 32 to start understanding. That correctness was not the same as honesty, and that honesty was the thing. Victoria had baggage. He'd understood this from the beginning. You didn't get to where she was, through what she'd been through, without collecting some. But the shape of it came into view gradually, the way things in fog became distinct only as you got close enough. She worked too much. Not in the way people said I work a lot to signal dedication. She worked the way people work when the work is also a wall. She was at the office by 7:30 and rarely left before 7. She ate lunch at her desk. She'd cancel plans she hadn't made, if that was possible, meaning she'd preemptively limit her availability the way someone braces for impact, keeping the margins clear because she'd learned that being needed could arrive without warning and she'd rather have the room. She said this directly one evening when he asked if she was okay after she'd checked her phone 3 times in 10 minutes. I keep the schedule loose, she said. It's a habit. From the company? From everything. She tucked the phone away. I'm better with buffer. I always have been. You came to the park, he said, every night for 6 weeks. That's not a loose schedule. She was quiet for a moment. No, she said. I suppose it isn't. He didn't push, but he filed it. The way she'd called this thing they had a tight schedule and acknowledged that she'd maintained it, which was a kind of admission coming from her. She was also, in a way he hadn't anticipated, occasionally lonely in a fashion she didn't recognize as loneliness. She had people around her constantly, her management team, her board, a social circle of other founders and investors she met at the kind of events Ethan would not have known how to dress for. But she'd mentioned 3 or 4 times, in different ways, that she'd gotten accustomed to a specific kind of being unseen. That people responded to Victoria Sterling, the CEO, and didn't quite reach Victoria Sterling, the person, and that she'd mostly stopped expecting them to. She'd said one Thursday evening, "Most people are afraid of me." "I know," he said. She'd looked at him sharply. "Does that bother you? Being afraid of you?" "Not being afraid of you. Being... You're not, are you? You're just not." He thought about how to put it. "You're specific," he said. "You have very clear edges. I think that reads as intimidating to people who don't have clear edges themselves, because they don't know how to locate you." He paused. "I work in construction. I deal with blueprints. I like things that are structurally sound." Victoria stared at him for a moment. "That might be the most left-handed compliment I've ever received." "I meant it as a compliment." "I know," she said. "That's the strange part. She wasn't easy. He wasn't pretending she was. She was demanding in the way that capable people are demanding. Not of others, exactly, but of situations, of conversations, of herself, and by proximity of the people she was honest with. She kept score of her own failures in a ledger she never quite put down. She'd built her whole company on the principle that problems could be solved if you applied enough intelligence and control, and she'd carried that principle into herself, which meant that her own imperfections had the quality of unsolved problems. He could see her working on them, sometimes, the slight tightness that came over her face when she'd been too impatient with someone, the evenings she'd said less because she was editing more. He recognized it because he did a version of the same thing. What he'd done, after Sarah, was apply all his project management instincts to the problem of grief, broken it into phases, managed the logistics, executed the practical requirements of a life continuing. It had worked, more or less, the way a workaround works. He'd kept Emma's world running. He'd kept his own running. He told himself that the numbness was temporary and mostly believed it, and then 4 years had passed and he'd been functional, and that had seemed like enough. Victoria didn't make him feel functional. She made him feel like a person again, which was harder to manage than functional, but considerably better. He knew what that meant. He'd known for a while. He just hadn't said it out loud. And neither had she. It was Emma who collapsed the distance, which was probably inevitable. It happened on a Saturday in the 7th week. Victoria had come over to their apartment for the first time. Ethan had invited her for dinner, a deliberate escalation. Nothing performed about it. And she'd arrived with wine she'd clearly researched. Not too expensive, not too casual, the specific gravity of someone who cared about getting the thing right. And a small gift for Emma. A turtle identification guide with color photographs. Not a toy. A reference book. She'd handed it over without commentary, and Emma had received it with the face she made when something met an unspoken standard. Dinner was chicken and roasted potatoes, which Ethan was good at, and it was neither romantic nor awkward. It was the comfortable, imperfect noise of three people occupying a kitchen. Victoria sat on a stool at the counter and kept him company while he cooked, asking about the subcontractor problem, which he'd been dealing with all week. Emma sat at the table with the turtle book and looked up periodically to insert herself into the conversation in her particular way, factual and without preamble. After dinner, Emma asked Victoria to read to her. The request arrived simply, without warning or setup. Emma just looked at Victoria across the table and said, "Can you read the next chapter? Dad does the voices wrong." Ethan said, "I do not do them wrong." "You make Gerald too cheerful," Emma said. "Gerald is a cheerful elephant." "He's a nuanced elephant," Emma said. Victoria had pressed her lips together very hard to avoid laughing outright. "I can read," she said. "I'll do my best with Gerald." Ethan did the dishes. Victoria sat on Emma's bed with the book, Elephant and Piggy, a series Emma had officially aged out of but maintained an attachment to on a clearly sentimental basis, and read. Ethan could hear her from the kitchen, her voice adjusting between characters with a dryness that was, he had to admit, actually quite good for Gerald. Emma interjected once to correct a detail, and Victoria accepted the correction and adjusted. By the time the chapter was done, Emma was quiet in the way that meant she was close to sleep. He heard Victoria say very softly, "Good night, Emma." And Emma, already most of the way under, said, "You read Gerald right." He set down the dish he was drying and just stood there for a moment in his kitchen. When Victoria came out, she walked to the counter and leaned against it and looked at him. Her expression was doing something complicated. Not distress, not happiness exactly, something more layered than either. "You okay?" he asked. "Yes," she said. Yes." She cleared her throat. She fell asleep. She does that. One second she's awake, then she's not. Victoria nodded, looking at the middle distance, the particular look of someone working through something they hadn't finished yet. "Hey," he said. She looked at him. He wasn't a man who made speeches. He'd never been. But he looked at her across his kitchen, this precise, controlled, occasionally lonely woman who'd almost died on a roadside at 19 and spent 10 years doing everything except letting herself be caught off guard, and who had read Gerald with the right amount of nuance for a 7-year-old who took nuance seriously. And he said simply, "I'm glad you found me." Victoria looked at him for a long, still moment. Something in her face went quiet in the particular way of someone who has been braced for impact and found, instead, solid ground. "I kept the address of that hospital," she said, "for 8 years. I had it in my wallet, in case I ever figured out the next step." She shook her head slightly. "I never figured out the next step. I just carried it." "What did you do with it?" "Threw it out," she said, "about 3 months ago. I decided I'd been holding it too long. And then you broke your shoe in a park." "And then I broke my shoe in a park." She exhaled. "The universe has a sense of humor." "Terrible timing, though," he said. "I was going to be late for Emma." "You were 7 minutes late." "6, he said. "I run." Victoria looked at him, and then she laughed. Not the controlled laugh she used in public, not the half laugh she used when something caught her sideways, but an actual laugh, low and warm and a little surprised by itself. And Ethan thought that this was the sound of someone letting something down that had been held up for a very long time. He leaned across the counter and kissed her. It was not smooth. He almost miscalculated the angle, and she made a small surprise sound that was not elegant, and his elbow hit the dish rack and the rack made a noise. But she kissed him back, and her hand came up to his jaw with a certainty that was entirely her. And the kitchen was a mess of drying dishes and a turtle book on the table and Emma asleep in the next room. And it was exactly and completely the right moment, because it wasn't trying to be anything other than what it was. When they broke apart, she looked at him with an expression he didn't have a clean word for. "You've got dish soap on your forearm," she said. He looked. He did. "Hazard of the job. You should be more careful." "I'm not particularly careful," he said. "You might have picked up on that." "I've noticed," she said, and the smile was the real one. the crooked one that came up too fast to be arranged. He got her a glass of water and they sat at the kitchen table with the turtle book between them and talked quietly until she left at 10:30, and the apartment after she left had the particular quality of a place that has been occupied by more people than its usual count. Warmer, slightly louder in its silence, full of a presence that hadn't entirely departed. He sat there for a while. Then he went and checked on Emma, who was exactly where she'd been when Victoria left her, face down in the pillow, Professor Cottontail under her arm, shoes off this time because Victoria had apparently gotten to them first. He stood in the doorway of his daughter's room for a long moment. He didn't know what was coming. He'd been a project manager long enough to know that the plan never survived contact with the actual build, that what you thought you were making and what you ended up with were rarely the same shape, and that this was not always a failure. What he knew was this: the person in his kitchen an hour ago was real. What he felt when she was in the room was real. Emma's small voice saying "you read Gerald right" was real. The rest he'd figure out as it came. The weeks after that evening in his kitchen had a different quality to them. Not louder, not more dramatic, but denser somehow, like the same amount of time was carrying more weight. Victoria came for dinner twice more that week. The week after, 3 times. Emma started setting 3 places at the table without being asked, which Ethan noticed and didn't comment on, because commenting on it would have made it into something that required managing, and he'd learned that Emma's gestures were better received quietly. They were not performing a relationship, they were building one, which was slower and less elegant, and involved things like disagreements about whether the kitchen window should be open or closed while cooking. Victoria said open, always, something about not wanting the smoke to settle. Ethan said it depended on the wind direction, which she found an insufficient answer, and small friction points that clarified rather than damaged. He was a man who left his tools in the living room. She was a woman who had a specific place for everything and noticed immediately when something wasn't in it. They negotiated these things without ceremony, imperfectly, which was how negotiation was supposed to go. What he hadn't anticipated was how completely Victoria seemed to understand the specific economy of his life, not just intellectually but viscerally in practice. She never pulled him away from Emma. She integrated. When Emma had a school event, Victoria asked about it afterward. When Emma went through a difficult week, a fight with Sophie that went deeper than the usual handball territory, something about exclusion that made Emma very still and very polite for 3 days, which was her version of being hurt. Victoria sat at the kitchen table with her and said bluntly and without over-softening it, "Mean kids are a real problem, and Sophie sounds like she's scared of how capable you are. That's her issue. But it still hurts, and that makes sense." Emma had looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once, as if a correct diagnosis had been made. Ethan had watched that from the doorway and thought, not for the first time, that Victoria was better with his daughter than she gave herself credit for. It was at the end of that week that he'd first told her, quietly, in the dark of his living room, with Emma asleep and the television off, that he loved her. He'd said it simply, without preamble or setup, because preamble felt dishonest, like wrapping something true in so much packaging that the thing itself got obscured. Victoria had been quiet for a moment, then she'd said, "I know, I've known for a while." A pause. "I love you too. That's also been true for a while. You could have said something. I was waiting for you to say it first." "Why?" "Because you're more careful than me." She'd looked at him. "When you say something, you mean it all the way." I wanted to wait for the all-the-way version. He'd thought about that for a while. He still thought about it sometimes. The idea that his version of careful could be interpreted as thoroughness rather than fear, it was a reframe he was still working with, but he found he liked it. They hadn't been careful after that. Not reckless, that wasn't either of them, but not careful. Which was exactly when Marcus Hale walked back into Victoria's life. Ethan hadn't known Marcus Hale existed until a Tuesday evening when he arrived at the park bench and Victoria was already there, not with coffee, sitting with her phone in her lap and an expression on her face that he had never seen before. She looked contained the way things look contained when what's inside has pressure behind it. "Hey," he said, sitting down. She looked at him. "Marcus called me." He waited. "My ex," she said. "We were together for almost 2 years. It ended 14 months ago. I ended it. She looked back at her phone. He's been calling on and off since. I usually don't pick up. Today I picked up. Why today? Because he called from a number I didn't recognize and I thought it was my COO. Her jaw tightened briefly. Classic Marcus. What did he want? To talk. She said the word the way you say a word that means something other than what it means. He wants to get coffee. He says he's been working on things and would like a conversation. He believes we have unresolved business. Do you? She looked at him directly. No. What was he like? When you were together? Victoria pressed her lips together, thinking about how to frame it. He recognized the pause. It was the pause of someone who'd told this story before and was deciding how much of the real version to use. Smart, she said. Successful. Knew how to be charming in public and a great deal less charming in private. She paused. He had opinions about how I should run my company, about how I should manage my time, about what I should prioritize. Her voice stayed even, but something in it had gone flat. He framed all of it as concern. It took me a while to understand that control dressed up as concern is still control. Ethan was quiet. He never hit me, she said. I want to be clear about that. But he understood leverage. He knew how to make you feel like you'd decided something when what had actually happened was he'd removed your other options. She exhaled. I was 28 when I finally named it correctly, and once I named it correctly, I left in 2 weeks. How did he take it? Not well. She turned her phone over in her hands. He was very calm. That was the part that was harder to deal with than if he'd been angry. He said we'd find our way back, in the tone of someone who's already planned the route. Ethan looked at the fountain. And now it's been 14 months. And now he's calling from unknown numbers and wants coffee. Are you going to see him? No. No hesitation. But I want you to know about it. Because if Marcus decides he's serious about this, he doesn't just call once and accept no. She met his eyes. You should know what that might look like. It was the kind of information delivered like a gift, which it was. Trusting someone with your complicated history was a gift, even when the history was ugly. He understood that. I appreciate you telling me, he said. Don't appreciate it, she said. Just understand that I'm not planning to manage this quietly and pretend everything is fine. I've done that before with him. It doesn't work. Okay? Okay, she said. She handed him his coffee from the bag at her feet. Now tell me about the subcontractor. I want to hear how the penalty clause worked out. He told her. She listened. The evening moved the way evenings moved, and they walked to pick up Emma together for the first time, which Emma received with the look of someone whose predictions are being confirmed at a satisfying rate. But Ethan was thinking about Marcus Hale, and the particular look on Victoria's face when she'd said, he doesn't just call once and accept no. Teat. Marcus didn't call once. He called 3 more times over the following 2 weeks, each from a different number. Victoria didn't pick up after the first time. He sent emails, not threatening, not overtly anything, just the particular kind of communication that's designed to create obligation through its very existence. Just checking in. Hope you're well. I think we should talk. He sent flowers to her office, which Victoria had the front desk dispose of before they reached her floor. He texted her assistant asking to be put on the calendar, which her assistant, who had worked for Victoria for 3 years and had excellent instincts, declined without consulting Victoria first. Victoria told Ethan all of it, which he was grateful for, even as each piece of information put something harder into his chest. Has he done this before? Ethan asked. After you broke up the first time. We didn't break up the first time, Victoria said. There wasn't a first time before this. She paused. He never had reason to believe I was seriously gone until now. Because of me? Because of everything. She looked at him. But yes, partly because of you. He processed this. He was realistic about what it meant. Not that he'd caused the problem, but that his presence had changed the variable Marcus was responding to, and that made it partly his terrain to navigate. I want to be useful, Ethan said. Tell me what useful looks like from your end. Victoria looked at him for a moment, and he could see her recalibrating something. He understood. She'd been managing things alone for a long time, and tell me what useful looks like was a different kind of question than most people asked. Most people either took over or stood back. He was asking for placement. Right now, she said, useful looks like you knowing everything I know and trusting that I'm handling it. I trust that. Good. She paused. But if that changes, if it escalates, I'll tell you before you see it yourself. It escalated. Ethan had spent a Tuesday evening at home. Victoria had a board dinner she couldn't move and had put Emma to bed at 8:30. He was on the couch with the subcontractor paperwork when his phone rang. Victoria's name on the screen, which was normal. The sound of her voice when he picked up was not. She wasn't panicking. Victoria did not panic, but there was an edge in her voice that he'd never heard before, the sound of someone maintaining control at a cost. He showed up at my building, she said. Ethan was already off the couch. Your apartment building? Yes, he was in the lobby when I got home from the dinner. He says he just wants to talk. The doorman called me before I came down. I'm in the elevator now. A pause. He knows which floor I'm on, Ethan. He's been here before. He came to my home. Don't go down, Ethan said. Tell the doorman not to let him up. Already done. A breath. He's going to make a scene in the lobby. I know how he is. He'll be very reasonable and very present, and he won't leave until someone asks him to leave enough times that it becomes a different kind of problem. Do you want me to come? A silence. Yes, she said. But Emma, I'll call Mrs. Kowalski. He was already moving toward the hallway. Give me 20 minutes. Mrs. Kowalski came through in 6, God bless her, arriving in her bathrobe with her key and a look that said she had questions and would ask none of them. Ethan was in his car in 7 and at Victoria's building in 18. Marcus Hale was still in the lobby. Ethan had constructed a version of him in his imagination, the smart, charming, controlled version Victoria had described. And the man in the lobby was consistent with that image in all the ways that made it worse. He was tall, well-dressed, the kind of handsome that photographed well. He was standing near the front desk talking to the doorman with the relaxed, patient posture of someone who'd decided that his presence was reasonable and was waiting for the other parties to catch up to that conclusion. He looked over when Ethan walked in. Ethan walked to the front desk, identified himself to the doorman, and said, Ms. Sterling is expecting me. Then he looked at Marcus Hale and said evenly, You should go. Marcus studied him with an attention that was more clinical than hostile, like he was categorizing. You must be Ethan. You should go, Ethan said again. She's not coming down. I just want to talk to her. He said it with a kind of patient reasonableness that Ethan recognized now. Control dressed as something else. We have history. That deserves a conversation. She ended the relationship. That was her decision. She's asked you not to contact her. Ethan kept his voice low and level. Showing up at her home isn't a conversation. It's pressure. You know the difference. Something shifted in Marcus's face. Not much. Just enough. She's told you things, Marcus said. She's told me what's relevant. And you've decided to play hero. He smiled, and it was the kind of smile that didn't reach anything. She has a pattern with that type. Ethan looked at him. I'm going upstairs, he said. The doorman knows not to let you up. If you stay in this lobby, he'll call the police. If you show up again after tonight, she'll have her attorney contact yours. He paused. That's not a threat. It's the sequence of events. Marcus held the look for a moment. Doing the calculation, Ethan could see it, assessing whether there was anything left to gain from the current position. Then he straightened, buttoned his jacket, and nodded, once, as if it was his own conclusion. Tell her I'll be in touch, he said. I won't, said Ethan. He watched Marcus walk out the front door, then turned to the doorman and said thank you, and took the elevator upstairs. Victoria met him at her door. She'd changed out of the board dinner clothes into something simpler, which told him she'd been home long enough to exhale a little. She looked at him. Is he gone? She said. He left. Ethan came inside. He's not the type who makes a scene in lobbies, too aware of how it looks. She closed the door and leaned against it for a second, and he could see the shape of the evening on her. Not broken, not fragile, but tired in the specific way of someone who's been managing something alone for a long time and is still half in that mode even with help standing in front of them. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't want to pull you out at night." "Don't," he said. "Ethan, you did the right thing calling me. I would have been angry if you hadn't." He said it simply. "This is not yours to handle alone." She looked at him for a moment, and something in her face shifted, and she crossed the room and put her arms around him, which was not a thing she did casually. He held on. They stood like that for a while in her hallway. "He knows your name," she said into his shoulder. "He does now. He's going to look you up. He does that. Research." She pulled back and looked at him. "He'll find out about Emma." Ethan was quiet. He'd already thought of this. He didn't like what was on the other side of it, but he'd thought of it. "Okay," he said. "That doesn't scare you?" "It concerns me. There's a difference." He looked at her. "We'll deal with it." The concern became concrete 8 days later on a Thursday afternoon when Ethan got off a site visit to find 2 missed calls from Emma's after-school center and 1 voicemail from Priya that was careful in the particular way of someone who doesn't want to alarm you but is, in fact, alarmed. He called back before he got to his car. "There was a man," Priya said. "Here, at pickup time. He wasn't on the approved list. He said he was a family friend and asked which child was Emma Cross. We didn't give him any information, obviously. We followed protocol. But he stood outside the gate for a while before he left." The cold that moved through Ethan's chest was specific and clean, not panic, fury. "What did he look like?" Ethan asked. Priya described him. Tall, dark jacket, the patient, reasonable posture of someone who wasn't in a hurry. "I'm on my way," Ethan said. He called Victoria while he drove. She picked up in 2 rings. "He went to Emma's school," he said. 3 seconds of silence. "Ethan, he didn't get in. They followed protocol. She's fine." He kept his voice controlled. "But he went to her school, Victoria." "I know." Her voice had gone quiet in a particular way. "I'm calling my attorney right now." "Do that. And then call me back." He picked up Emma from the center, which was on full lockdown in the polite, institutional way of places that have protocols for this. Emma was at the front desk, not waiting by the window this time, not with her backpack on. And when Ethan walked in, she crossed the room and hugged him, which she didn't always do on regular days. She was 7, and she'd picked up something from the air of the place. On the drive home, she was quiet for 2 blocks. Then, "Was there a bad man at my school?" He kept his eyes on the road. "There was someone who wasn't supposed to be there. The people at the center handled it." "Is he the reason you drove fast?" He hadn't thought she'd noticed that. "Yes." "Is he connected to Victoria?" He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. She was looking out the window. Her hands were folded in her lap. "He's someone from her past," Ethan said. "He's been making trouble." "Is she okay?" "She's okay. She's handling it." Emma nodded slowly. "Are you scared?" "A little," he said, because lying to Emma about this felt like the wrong move. "But I'm more angry than scared, and when I'm angry I make plans, so we're okay." Emma looked at his reflection in the mirror. "Okay," she said, and went back to the window. She didn't say anything else about it that evening, but she stayed closer than usual, sitting next to him on the couch while he made calls, within arm's reach while he cooked dinner. She ate without complaint, including the broccoli, which she normally required negotiation on. Ethan understood. This was her version of circling up. She wasn't frightened in the surface way, not crying or asking repeated questions. She was doing what he did, staying close and making plans. He loved his daughter fiercely that evening, in the specific and crushing way that fear focuses love. Victoria's attorney filed for a restraining order the next morning. The grounds were solid. The lobby appearance, the school visit, the documented calls and messages. The attorney said the school incident was particularly useful. That kind of behavior around a child changed the legal calculus considerably. Victoria had records. Her assistant had kept records. Ethan had records of his own. The order came through in 4 days, which was fast. Victoria said it was because the attorney was good and the evidence was organized, and she said this in the flat tone of someone who'd had to become conversant with things she wished she didn't know. Marcus's attorney sent a brief response suggesting his client disagreed with the characterization of events. It was the legal equivalent of the lobby posture, very reasonable, very present. His attorney advised him to comply, and he did comply, technically, but compliance with a restraining order did not mean disappearance. It meant he stayed outside the boundary. And in the days after the order was issued, Ethan had the sensation once or twice of being watched, not provably, not in a way he could point to, just the construction site instinct of something not sitting right. A car outside his building 2 mornings in a row. A figure at the park entrance one evening that moved when he turned to look. He said nothing to Victoria about this, not because he was managing her, because he didn't have anything solid, and presenting unverifiable concern to someone who was already under pressure was not useful. He had his own way of handling the perimeter. He called Marcus Hale's number from his own phone on a Wednesday night, after Emma was asleep. He'd gotten it from Victoria's call log. Marcus picked up in 2 rings. "I know it's you, Cross," he said. "Good," Ethan said. "Then this is simple. You've got a restraining order. I know you understand what that means legally. What you might not know is that I've been working job sites for 10 years, and I know which conversations go on record and which ones don't, and this one doesn't." He kept his voice completely level. "Stay away from Emma's school. Stay away from my block. The lobby conversation was your one informal warning. Anything after this goes straight to her attorney and then to the DA's office, and you're smart enough to know what that costs someone in your position." Silence. "She's moved on," Ethan said. "That's not going to change. You're not going to call her back into something by making her life difficult. The only thing that happens if you keep this up is consequences for you." He paused. "That's all I had." He hung up. His hands were steady. He sat in the kitchen for a while, not drinking the water he'd poured. It might work. It might not. Marcus Hale was the kind of man who operated on leverage, and Ethan had just shown him a different kind of leverage. Not rage, not drama, just a calm accounting of outcomes. Whether Marcus processed that correctly was not something Ethan could control. What he could control was his own house, his own child, his own ground. He checked on Emma, face down in the pillow, Professor Cottontail in place, and then texted Victoria. "Call made. He knows the parameters. Attorney loop is clean if anything comes of it." She called him instead of texting back. Her voice when she said his name had something in it that she usually kept below the surface. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know. You're not... This isn't yours to... Victoria." He said her name quietly. "You and Emma are mine to protect. That's not a question anymore. I'm not asking your permission for that." A long pause on her end. He could hear her breathing. "Okay," she said. "Okay. I hate that he went to her school," she said. And in those words, he heard everything she hadn't let herself say in the attorney meetings and the controlled conversations. The raw, direct guilt of someone who believed their past had put a child in the radius of something dangerous. "It wasn't your fault," he said. "I know that," she said. "And I also feel it like it is, and both of those are true simultaneously." "I know. I would never want anything to happen to her. Not for anything." "I know that too." He leaned back in the kitchen chair. "She asked me if you were okay. In the car on the way home from school. Her first question was about you." Another silence, this one different. "She did?" Victoria said. "First question. She didn't ask about herself. She asked about you." He let that sit there for a moment. "Think about what that means about where she's put you." He could hear the quality of the silence on Victoria's end, could feel her processing it, holding it, understanding the weight of it. "Good night, Ethan," she said, and her voice was softer than it had been. "Good night." He stayed in the kitchen after they hung up. Outside the window, the city was doing its usual thing, lights and noise and the low, constant sound of a place that didn't stop. He thought about Marcus's face in that lobby. He thought about Emma's hands folded in her lap on the drive home. He thought about Victoria's voice saying, "I would never want anything to happen to her, not for anything," and the way that wasn't a mother's statement or a girlfriend's statement, but something more elemental than either. The restraining order was paper. Paper had limits. But Marcus had heard his voice, had heard the accounting of outcomes. And Ethan Cross was a man who understood structural load, where things held and where they gave. And the conversation he'd had tonight was not the kind that left a man like Marcus with any profitable next step. He locked the kitchen window and went to bed. The quiet that followed the restraining order was not peace. Ethan understood the difference. Peace was a thing that settled into the structure of a day, changed the temperature of it. What they had in the 2 weeks after the order was more like held breath. The particular stillness of a situation that hasn't resolved so much as paused, waiting to see if anyone would push it again. Marcus didn't push it, not visibly. The calls stopped. The emails stopped. The flowers didn't come again. Victoria's attorney reported nothing. Ethan stopped having the sensation of being watched, which could have meant Marcus had pulled back or could have meant he'd gotten better at the perimeter. Ethan couldn't know which, and that not knowing sat in the back of his days like a low sound you can't locate. He didn't let it run his life. He went to work. He came home. He picked up Emma. He had dinner with Victoria 3 times that week and the week after, and the table had 3 places set, and the kitchen window argument had evolved into a running truce where he opened it on dry nights and left it closed when the wind was wrong, which Victoria accepted with the air of someone who has decided a battle is not worth the territory. Emma's life stabilized faster than he expected. Kids were like that, not resilient in the way people romanticized, not bouncing back like rubber, but adaptive in a practical way. The school incident had scared her in the particular quiet way things scared Emma, and she'd processed it by gathering information and then filing it under handled when the information confirmed it was handled. The center had new protocols. Ethan had explained them to her. She'd asked 3 clarifying questions, received satisfactory answers, and moved on to the next thing, which was a science project about water cycles. But she was watching Victoria differently now. Not with suspicion. With something closer to assessment. The ongoing kind. The kind that runs in the background. She was checking something, measuring something, in the way she'd been measuring things since she was old enough to understand that people came and people left, and that the difference between them was not always predictable. Ethan watched this without interfering. It wasn't his to manage. Victoria, to her credit, didn't try to manage it either. She showed up, consistently, and she was the same person she'd been before. No excess warmth designed to reassure. No performance of stability. Just herself, which was direct and sometimes a little impatient, and occasionally very funny in the dry, quiet way she was funny, and which made dinner conversation at that table something Emma clearly looked forward to even when she pretended it was incidental. The evening the assessment concluded, not announced, not performed, but concluded, was a Wednesday, 6 weeks after the restraining order. Emma had been working on the water cycle project for 2 days. It was a poster, and it was thorough in the way Emma's projects were thorough, with labeled diagrams and color-coded elements, and a factual sidebar she'd written herself. She'd been carrying it around the apartment like a contractor carrying a blueprint, reviewing it periodically to see if anything needed adjustment. Victoria arrived after dinner that evening. She'd had a late meeting, came straight from the office, still in her work clothes. Ethan was washing dishes. Emma was at the kitchen table with the poster. Victoria sat across from Emma and said, "Can I see?" Emma pushed it across the table. Victoria looked at it for a solid 45 seconds, which was longer than most adults looked at anything Emma produced before pivoting to general praise. She didn't give general praise. She said, "The evaporation section is strong, but your condensation label is on the wrong side of the cloud. It should be beneath it, pointing down. Condensation is what falls, not what rises." Emma looked at the poster, looked at Victoria. "Are you sure?" "Yes." Emma pulled the poster back, studied it, picked up her marker, and made the correction without a word. Ethan dried the same pot for about 40 seconds longer than it needed. "The rest is accurate," Victoria said. "The teacher's going to like the sidebar. Most kids won't have done one." "I know," Emma said. "That's why I did it." Victoria looked at her. "Good thinking." Emma capped the marker and looked up at Victoria with an expression Ethan hadn't seen on his daughter's face before. Not quite openness, but the thing just before openness. The door cracked. "Can I ask you something?" Emma said. "Yes." "When you were building your company," Emma said, "were you scared?" Victoria didn't immediately answer, which was the right move. She sat with the question, and Emma watched her sit with it, which Ethan understood was part of the test. Not just what she'd answer, but whether she'd take the question seriously. In the beginning, yes, Victoria said, but the first year, I was scared I'd make the wrong decision and it would all fall apart, and everyone who'd told me it was a bad idea would have been right. She paused. After a while, I got less scared and more, I don't know, tired maybe, in a functional way. The kind of tired where you keep going because stopping takes as much energy as moving. Did it fall apart? Parts of it? Several times. Victoria looked at her. The parts that fell apart usually got replaced by better parts. Not always, but often enough. Emma considered this. So being scared doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Usually it means the opposite, Victoria said. If you're not scared of it, it probably doesn't matter enough to be worth doing. Emma looked at the poster for a moment, then back at Victoria. Then she got up from the table, walked around it, and hugged Victoria with the clean, uncomplicated directness that Emma reserved for things she'd already decided. Victoria sat very still for a second, the stillness of someone caught off guard. And then her arms came up and she held on, and her eyes over Emma's shoulder had a look that Ethan would not have been able to describe precisely, but would remember for a long time. He turned back to the dishes. He didn't trust his face just then. The call from Marcus's attorney came on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks later. Not to Victoria, to Ethan. He was on a site when the call came in, an unknown number. He stepped away from the subcontractor meeting he'd been running and answered because he'd learned to answer unknown numbers. The attorney introduced himself, said he was calling on behalf of his client, Marcus Hale, regarding a conversation Mr. Cross had initiated with Mr. Hale some weeks prior. Said his client felt the conversation had constituted harassment and that he wanted to formally document that any further contact from Mr. Cross would result in legal response. Ethan listened to the full thing before he said anything. Then he said, I made one phone call 6 weeks ago to communicate the parameters of the existing restraining order. I have the call log and I have notes. Your client can document whatever he'd like. Is there anything else? The attorney said there was not, and that he hoped the situation could be resolved without further escalation. Ethan said he hoped the same and ended the call. He stood on the site for a moment with the noise of construction around him and thought about what the call actually meant. Not the content of it. The content was thin, a maneuver more than a genuine legal threat. What it meant was that Marcus Hale was still paying attention, still engaged, still running the board. He called Victoria. He's probing, she said when he'd finished explaining. Her voice had the flat, analytical qualities she used when she was reading a situation like a balance sheet. It's what he does when he doesn't have a direct play available. He creates lateral pressure. Lateral pressure on me instead of you, Ethan said. Yes. A pause. He's trying to make you a liability, make you feel like the relationship is creating legal exposure for you. Is it? No. My attorney's already confirmed your call was within normal communication bounds. She paused again, this one different. Ethan, I'm sorry. This is... Stop, he said, not unkindly. Don't apologize for him. You didn't do this. I know that. I'm still sorry it's landing on you. It's fine. It's not fine. No, he said. It's not fine. But it's manageable. And I'm not walking away from something because it's inconvenient. He said it directly. That needs to be clear between us. I am not scared off. Not by a phone call, not by a proxy attorney, not by whatever he tries next. The silence on her end was a specific kind, the kind where someone is deciding whether to believe something they want to believe. Okay, she said. I mean it. I know you do, she said. That's what I'm sitting with. He understood. It was one thing for a man to say he wasn't going anywhere. It was another thing to believe it. When you'd been in a relationship with someone who'd taught you that commitment was conditional and that conditions could be manufactured, he didn't have a way to prove it except to keep showing up. So that's what he did. Marcus violated the restraining order on a Friday evening in October, 6 weeks after the attorney call. Victoria had been at a company event, a product launch, the kind of evening she showed up to because it mattered to the team even when the social component was draining. She left at 9:30 and was walking to her car in the parking structure attached to the venue when Marcus stepped out of a stairwell. Not running, not aggressive. Standing in her path with his hands in his jacket pockets, the same patient posture she'd described. The posture she'd spent 2 years learning was not patience, but occupation. "I just want 5 minutes," he said. She called 911 before she said a single word to him. He hadn't expected that. She could see it in the slight recalibration of his expression. Then she called Ethan, because the 911 operator asked her to stay on the line, but she wanted him to know in real time. Ethan was at her apartment when she arrived. He'd driven there after she'd called because her building was closer than the venue, and he'd known she'd come home after. He was in the lobby when she walked in, and she came directly to him and didn't say anything for a moment, just stood close, and he put his hand on her back and kept it there. "Are you okay?" he said. Yes. It shook me." She said it matter-of-factly, the way she said things she wasn't going to dress up. "I didn't expect him in that parking structure. I should have been more careful about the route." "Don't do that," Ethan said. She looked up at him. "Don't make it about what you should have done," he said. "He violated a court order. That's on him. Entirely." She held the look for a moment, and he could see her working against a habit. The habit of locating the part of the problem that was hers, the thing she could have controlled. It was the same instinct that made her good at running a company and difficult on herself. "The police took a report," she said. "My attorney will have the violation documentation by morning." "Good." "He didn't touch me. He didn't threaten me in specific terms. He just stood there." "Standing in your path after a court order says he can't come near you is enough," Ethan said. "Your attorney knows that." She nodded. They went upstairs. He made her tea, which was not a thing he normally made. He was a coffee person, functionally. But she kept tea in the apartment and he knew where it was, and the act of making it was the kind of useful that was within reach. She sat at the kitchen island and held the mug and let herself be still. "He looked at me," she said, after a while. "The way he used to look at me when he'd decided something, not angry, certain. Like he'd run the numbers and concluded this wasn't over." She turned the mug in her hands. "And I thought, standing in that parking structure, I thought, I am so tired of being a variable in someone else's calculation." "You're not," Ethan said. "I know." She looked at him. "That's also why I called you before the operator told me to hang up with anyone else. Because I wanted to hear your voice, and you're not. You don't do calculations like that, you just show up." He sat down across from her. "I'm going to keep showing up." "I know," she said again. "I'm trying to stop finding that surprising." "Take your time." She smiled at that, small and genuine. "You're very patient for someone who's impatient in every other context." "I'm patient about things that matter," he said. She looked at her tea. "He's going to face real consequences this time. The attorney said violation of the order goes to criminal court. This won't be civil anymore." "Good." "He might fight it." "Let him fight it," Ethan said. "It'll cost him more than it costs you." She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the city made its city noises. The kitchen was warm, in the way kitchens get warm when someone's been boiling water in them. "I don't want Emma to know about tonight," Victoria said. "Not yet. She's already been through the school thing." "Agreed. When she needs to know, we'll tell her together. But not yet." Victoria looked at him across the island. Together. She heard it. He meant it to be heard. "Okay," she said. "Hoshab." The criminal violation hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. In the interim, the attorney got a modified order with stricter geographic boundaries, and Marcus's attorney advised his client, this came through channels, secondhand, to suspend all activity pending the hearing. Whether that advice was taken was something Ethan chose not to spend his energy tracking. He had a site to manage and a daughter to raise and a relationship to be present in, and those 3 things were more than enough to fill the days. What he noticed in those 3 weeks was Victoria changing, not in the large, dramatic way of someone who'd had a realization, more like the incremental change of a house settling after a long disturbance, finding its new level. She left the office earlier 3 days a week, which was not a small thing. She started texting him in the middle of the day about incidental things. A conversation she'd had, something she'd read, Once a photograph of a very large and apparently dignified pigeon she'd encountered outside her building with the caption, "Barnaby, clearly migrated." He'd laughed at his phone on a job site, and his site foreman had given him a look. She was letting herself have a life that wasn't entirely structured around work and defense. He could see it happening, and he didn't remark on it, because remarking on it would make her self-conscious about it, and self-consciousness was the enemy of any new habit. Emma noticed, too, in her way. "She seems less tense," Emma said one Sunday afternoon, out of nowhere, while they were watching a nature documentary about ocean ecosystems. Ethan looked over. "Who?" Emma gave him the look. "Victoria. She's had a stressful few months," he said. "I know." Emma turned back to the screen. "But she seems less tense, like she stopped waiting for something." He thought about that for the rest of the documentary. The hearing went cleanly. Marcus Hale violated a court order. The documentation was solid, the parking structure had camera footage that his attorney couldn't argue with, and the judge had the particular attitude of someone who found this category of case both simple and tiresome. Marcus received a criminal conviction, misdemeanor with conditions, and the order was extended to 3 years with provisions that his own attorney had reportedly told him not to contest if he had any sense. Victoria called Ethan from the courthouse steps. He was on site, and he stepped away from a delivery argument to answer. "It's done," she said. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding for 3 months. "How are you?" "Relieved." A pause. "Angry, still. I'll probably be angry about this for a long time, but relieved underneath the angry." "That's the right order," he said. "My attorney wants to go for lunch. She's earned it. Go." "I'll be at yours for dinner," she said. It wasn't quite a question. "Emma's making a list of turtle facts she wants to share with you," he said. "She's been saving them up." He heard Victoria exhale. "Not the tired kind, the other kind. Tell her I'm coming." He went back to the delivery argument, resolved it in 11 minutes, and then stood on the site in the October light and let himself feel something that wasn't obligation or vigilance or the managed calm of a man who'd been keeping his footing in uncertain terrain. It felt like relief. Clean and simple. The storm had moved through. November arrived, and with it a different quality to everything. They found a rhythm that wasn't built around managing anything, just the ordinary architecture of a shared life, improvised as it went, imperfect in the details and solid underneath. Victoria had a drawer in Ethan's bedroom. He had a standing space in the refrigerator at her apartment, which she'd cleared without announcement, and which he'd found one evening with a note inside it that said, "Stop putting your leftovers on the wrong shelf." He had, in fact, been putting them on the wrong shelf. Emma's water cycle project got an A-, which she was initially annoyed about until Victoria pointed out that the minus was on presentation format, not content, and that content was the thing that actually mattered. Emma had accepted this assessment and then spent 20 minutes telling Victoria everything she'd since learned about the hydrological cycle in wetland ecosystems, and Victoria had listened with the focused attention she gave to things she found genuinely interesting, which Emma registered and responded to by going deeper into the subject, and they'd both disappeared into it while Ethan cooked dinner and pretended not to be watching. He thought about Sarah sometimes in these moments, not with the old weight that had changed its texture over 4 years, become something he could carry rather than something that carried him. He thought about her watching Emma grow and what she would have made of all of this. Sarah had been a woman who believed in the stubbornness of good things, that they didn't happen by accident, and they didn't survive by accident either, and that the work of maintaining them was worth it. He thought she'd have found Victoria interesting. He thought she'd have had opinions about Victoria's jacket choices, loudly and specifically stated. He thought she'd have been glad. One evening in November, after Emma was asleep, he and Victoria were on the couch. She had her tablet, he had a project file he was pretending to review, but mostly wasn't. And she said without looking up, "I want to take you and Emma somewhere. For Thanksgiving." He looked over. "Where?" "There's a cabin I rent sometimes, about 2 hours out of the city. It's on a lake. Very quiet." She did look up then. Emma might like the lake, and I thought... She stopped. Started again. I thought it would be good to be somewhere that was just ours. No office, no site, just a few days. He looked at her. He'd known Victoria for 4 months now, which was not a long time in the way that time was supposed to work. What he also knew was that 4 months with Victoria had more texture than several years with most people, because she didn't go shallow on anything, and that every day they'd accumulated had been real in a specific and uncurated way. Emma will want to know if there are turtles in the lake, he said. I already checked. There are painted turtles. She paused. 12 to 15, based on the property owner's count. He stared at her. She held the look with the expression of someone who'd done something extremely reasonable and couldn't understand why it warranted a reaction. You already checked, he said. Obviously. She went back to her tablet. She'll want to name them. I've already decided I'm not stopping her. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, Victoria. I'm going to ask you something in a few months, he said. I want you to know that I'm going to ask. She went still. The tablet didn't move. I'm not asking tonight, he said. But I want you to know it's coming, so it's not a surprise, and you're not making any decisions under surprise. He paused. That's how I do things. She lowered the tablet to her lap. She was looking at him with the look she got when something had reached her more directly than she'd been braced for. Not overwhelmed, not performing surprise, but genuinely moved in the specific way of someone who doesn't get moved by ordinary things and knows when something isn't ordinary. Okay, she said, is that... Ethan, she cut him off, not unkindly. It's okay. More than okay. She looked at him steadily. I'll be here when you ask. He nodded. She went back to her tablet. He went back to his project file. Outside the window, November was doing its thing, cold and clear. The city lit up in the particular way it lit up before winter set in properly, all the hard edges softened by distance and light. He thought about Route 9 in the rain. 22 years old and terrified and talking about a concrete pour because he didn't know what else to say. A hand gripping his through a gap in a door. A promise that had been literal enough in the end. He looked at Victoria on his couch, frowning at something on her tablet, her shoes off, her hair half falling out of the knot she'd put it in 12 hours ago. He thought about what a long way it was from a drainage ditch in a storm to here, and how every piece of the distance, the grief and the work, and the years of just keeping things running had been necessary for this particular evening to be possible. How the path made a kind of sense only from the far end of it. He didn't say any of this. He went back to his project file. But he was, in the quiet of his own chest, entirely and specifically grateful. Thanksgiving at the lake cabin was 3 days of imperfect, ordinary good. The cabin itself was smaller than Ethan had imagined. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that required you to turn sideways to pass someone, a porch that ran the full length of the back of the house and looked out over water that went gray in the mornings and turned something close to copper in the late afternoons. Victoria had been renting it for 4 years, she said, for when the city got too loud inside her head. She'd never brought anyone with her before. She said this without drama, but Ethan understood what it meant. Emma found the painted turtles on the first morning. There were 11 visible from the dock in Kiar. She counted 3 times to confirm, and she began the naming process with a methodical deliberateness that suggested she'd been preparing for this. Victoria sat on the dock with her, both of them with their feet hanging over the water, and Emma narrated each turtle's distinguishing features as she assigned each name. Victoria listened, asked questions, offered no unsolicited opinions, and when Emma assigned the largest turtle the name Constance, and explained that it was because she looked like someone who'd made up her mind about everything, Victoria said, "That's exactly right," with the tone of someone who genuinely agreed. Ethan watched them from the porch with his coffee and thought about how the things you can't plan are the only ones that matter. They cooked Thanksgiving dinner together, which was a logistical collaboration of uneven skill distribution. Victoria could produce exactly 2 dishes reliably, both of which she made with precision, and neither of which was turkey. Ethan handled the turkey, which he was adequate at, and Emma handled the cranberry sauce from a recipe she'd found and printed out herself and followed with the discipline of a chemist. The kitchen was too small for 3 people. Nobody cared. They ate at 6 o'clock at a table that wasn't big enough for the food and spent an hour not going anywhere, just sitting in the warm noise of it. After Emma was asleep, they sat on the back porch in the cold with blankets and the specific silence of a place that had no traffic in it. Stars, which the city didn't really have. The sound of the lake doing its slow work against the dock. She named 11 turtles, Victoria said. She'll name the rest tomorrow, Ethan said. She's already named them. She told me after dinner. She wanted to observe them more before she made it official. He turned to look at her. She told you and not me? She said you'd tell her to go to bed. He opened his mouth and closed it. I would have told her to go to bed. I know. Victoria had the expression of someone winning an argument without raising her voice. He was very used to this expression. He looked back at the water. She trusts you, he said. I know. Softer this time. That's not something she gives quickly. I know that too. A pause. I don't take it lightly. He believed her. He'd believed her for a while, but sitting on a porch in the dark with the evidence of 3 days of the three of them simply being people together, no crises, no management, just the actual texture of shared time, he felt it differently, felt it as solid, the way you feel a floor differently when you've stopped bracing for it to give. I was going to wait until after New Year's, he said. Victoria was quiet. I had a plan, he said. A restaurant. A thing I was going to say. He paused. It was a good plan. I'd worked on it. What happened to the plan? He looked at her. You're sitting on a porch in the dark, in a place you've never brought anyone, and my daughter told you the names of 11 turtles she hadn't finished observing yet. He shook his head. I can't think of a restaurant that's better than this. She looked at him with the look that she got when something arrived before she was ready for it. Not overwhelmed, but unguarded in a way that she'd had to learn to allow. He reached into the pocket of his jacket. The ring was not elaborate. He'd spent a week thinking about elaborate, and then let it go because elaborate was not what either of them were. It was a simple band with a single stone, dark blue, chosen because it was specific and not because it was the obvious choice, and because when he'd seen it, he'd thought immediately of the color of a lake in late afternoon. He held it out in the dark. Not kneeling, they were both in chairs with blankets on their laps, and the dock creaking below them, and kneeling would have required rearranging all of that and would have changed the temperature of the moment into something more performed than felt. Victoria, he said, marry me. Not will you. Just the direct version, the one that was already sure of itself but still needed her answer to be complete. She looked at the ring for a moment, then at him. Her eyes were wet, which was not something he'd seen in bright light on Victoria Sterling's face. She'd cried at the park bench the first day, but that had been different. This was more deliberate. This was chosen. Yes, she said. He put the ring on her finger. It fit. He'd guessed from the size of a bracelet he'd borrowed without asking and returned before she noticed. And the guess had been correct, which he felt unreasonably pleased about. She looked at her hand. Then she said, You borrowed my bracelet. I returned it. I noticed it was moved, but you didn't know why. No. She looked up. I thought you just knocked it off the nightstand. I'm more deliberate than that, he said. She shook her head, the crooked smile coming up the way it came, too fast to arrange. And then she reached across the space between their chairs and took his hand, and they sat there on the porch with the dark water below them and the stars doing what stars do, which is be indifferent to everything happening beneath them and somehow the right backdrop for it anyway. They didn't talk for a while. They didn't need to. Emma found out the next morning. Ethan had not planned how to tell her, which, in retrospect, he should have, but the morning happened the way mornings happened. Emma appeared from the bedroom in her socks at 7:15, registered that Victoria was already at the kitchen table with coffee, sat down across from her, and then stopped. Her eyes went to Victoria's hand, back up to Victoria's face. Is that a ring? Emma said. Victoria extended her hand across the table. Emma looked at it for several seconds with the concentration she brought to diagrams. Dad, Emma called, without raising her voice. Ethan came out of the kitchen. I know. Emma looked at him, then at the ring, then at him again. You asked her. I did. She said yes. She did. Emma sat with this. Her face was doing several things at once, processing, calculating, feeling, in whatever order Emma processed and calculated and felt things, which was never quite visible from the outside. So she's going to be what do I call her? Emma said. Whatever you want, Ethan said. There's no requirement. Emma looked at Victoria. What do you want me to call you? Victoria held Emma's look without flinching. Whatever feels right to you. I'm not going to tell you what to feel. Emma considered this for what was probably 15 seconds, but felt longer. Can I think about it? Take as long as you want, Victoria said. Emma nodded. She got up from the table, went to the porch, and stood looking at the lake. They watched her through the glass door. This small, serious person in her socks on a cold porch, hands clasped behind her back in her thinking posture, working through something that mattered. After about 3 minutes, she came back inside. Victoria, she said. Victoria looked at her. I'm going to call you Victoria, Emma said, because that's your name. And I think names are important, and you should use them. She paused. But you're also going to be my family, and you don't need a different word for that because that's just what you are. The kitchen was very quiet for a moment. That works for me, Victoria said. Her voice was steady. The rest of her face was working harder. Emma nodded, sat back down, and reached for the orange juice. Can we see the turtles before we pack? Yes, Ethan said. I want to check if Constance moved. She was in a different position yesterday afternoon. We'll check on Constance, Victoria said. They did. She had moved, 3 feet to the right, onto a sunnier rock, and Emma documented this in her notebook with the date and time and a small annotated sketch. Victoria stood at the end of the dock and watched the water and breathed the cold air, and Ethan stood next to her and didn't need to say anything, and Emma narrated the movements of the remaining turtles with the authority of someone who has earned her expertise, and the morning was cold and clear and imperfect and entirely enough. They married in March. Small was the plan, and small was what happened, which required some negotiation, because Victoria's professional world had opinions about events associated with Victoria Sterling, and those opinions trended toward scale. She shut them down with the efficiency she applied to everything that wasn't aligned with what she'd decided. This was hers. It was not a networking event. It was not a press opportunity. It was 31 people in a room, close friends, people who'd actually shown up when things were difficult. Her mother, Elena, his crew foreman, Danny, who cried more than anyone and denied it afterward. Elena Sterling was a small woman who looked at Ethan for about 4 minutes during the rehearsal dinner, and then said, in the direct way that Victoria had clearly inherited, "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" he said. "Someone more impressed with himself," she said. "Men who end up with women like Victoria usually are." She studied him. "You're not." "She doesn't need someone impressed with her," Ethan said. "She needs someone who's paying attention." Elena nodded once, the way Emma nodded when a correct answer had been given. He understood then where Emma had picked up that particular gesture. The ceremony was in the early afternoon, in the garden of a restaurant they both liked for the specific reason that neither of them had significant memories attached to it, which made it clean. No venue that came with someone else's story. Emma stood beside them, not flower girl, not ring bearer, just beside them, which was what she'd asked for and what was accurate. She wore a dress she'd chosen herself, deep green, and she wore it with the composure of someone who had been taking this seriously for months and intended to continue. Ethan looked at Victoria at the front of that garden and thought, briefly, clearly, about all the accumulated distance between the drainage ditch on Route 9 and this specific afternoon. About the 10 years of 2 lives running parallel without knowing it, and the 6-inch heel strap that had buckled at the wrong moment on a Tuesday evening. About the conversation he'd had with himself on a job site 1,000 times. The one where he told himself that what he had was sufficient, that functional was the same as okay, that the numbness was temporary and would lift on its own. It didn't lift on its own. It lifted because someone showed up on a bench with the wrong coffee and told him the truth about where she'd been for a decade. He was grateful for the buckle. He was grateful for the storm, even. He was grateful for every piece of the path that had been heavy and hard and that he would not have chosen, because the path had deposited him exactly here, and here was better than anything he'd had the imagination to want for himself. He didn't say any of this during the ceremony. What he said was simpler and more honest. that he would show up and keep showing up for as long as showing up was an option. Victoria said something equally direct. She said she had spent 10 years looking for a man she was afraid she'd invented, and that finding out he was real had been one thing, and finding out he was also the kind of person she'd want to build a life with was something else entirely, and that she was still somewhat surprised by the distance between those two facts and how it had all collapsed into this. Emma, standing beside them, said audibly, "She's not going to cry." Victoria, without breaking, said, "Correct." Danny the foreman cried for everyone. Quad. They bought the house in June. Not elaborate, practical and specific, a 3-bedroom in a neighborhood that had good schools, and a park close enough to walk to, and a yard that was currently a disaster zone of overgrown grass and a raised garden bed that had been abandoned several seasons ago. Ethan looked at it and saw things to fix. Victoria looked at it and ran the numbers and liked them. Emma looked at it and immediately identified which room was hers based on the light. The house buying process was exactly as frustrating as every person who had ever bought a house had warned them it would be, plus several complications specific to combining Victoria's financial profile with Ethan's, which required paperwork conversations that tested both of them. She was too fast with conclusions. He was too slow to move once he'd made them. They fought about this twice in the realtor's office, briefly and specifically, and resolved it both times before they left because they'd both learned that carrying a disagreement past its natural endpoint was a waste that neither of them could afford. Moving day was June 14th. It was hot and unorganized, and the furniture company was 2 hours late, and Danny showed up with the wrong size truck and had to make 3 trips, and Emma insisted on carrying her turtle book collection herself because she didn't trust the movers with them, which meant she was in the way for most of the morning. Victoria directed the placement of everything in the living room with the precision of someone reading a logistics plan and then rearranged it twice when the plan met the actual dimensions. Ethan fixed a door hinge that had been wrong since before they moved in. By evening, the house had the specific quality of a place that has become occupied. Not comfortable yet, not settled, but claimed. Boxes in every room, one couch in the right position, and everything else provisional. Emma had set up her room before anything else was done, which included Professor Cottontail on the bed and the turtle book collection on the window ledge, arranged by size. They ate pizza on the living room floor because the table wasn't set up yet. Emma fell asleep with half a slice still in her hand. Ethan carried her to her room and tucked her in, and when he came back, Victoria was sitting on the floor with her back against the couch, looking at the boxes and the provisional chaos of a life mid-arrangement. "It needs a lot of work," she said. "I know. The kitchen backsplash is hideous. I know. I'll fix it. The yard is worse. Garden beds are good. Just need clearing." He sat down next to her on the floor. "Give me 6 months. It'll be a different house." She looked at him. "I'm not complaining. I know, you're assessing." "I'm allowed to assess." "You're always assessing," he said. "I would never try to stop you." She leaned her head against his shoulder, which was something she'd started doing in the past few months. Small moments of contact that she'd have found unnecessary 8 months ago and now gave without thinking about. He didn't remark on it. He just let it be what it was. "We made a house," she said. "We bought a house," he said. "We'll make it." "Same thing." "Not quite," he said, "but close enough for tonight." To watch it. The anniversary came in November. He'd marked the date the previous year, and she'd marked it too, separately, and when they'd realized they'd both remembered without being reminded, there had been a moment between them that was too layered for simple language. The date was November 4th, the night of the storm, the night on Route 9. This year, the first year married, they made a decision together. They would drive out to the highway. Not to perform a ritual, not to make it into a monument, but because the place was real and the thing that happened there was real, and both of them had been circling it their whole adult lives, and it seemed right to stand there once, deliberately, together. Emma stayed with Mrs. Kowalski, who had graduated from crisis backup to standard grandmother-adjacent fixture in all of their lives, and who received this role with the combination of brisk competence and genuine affection that made her so useful in it. They drove out in the late afternoon. The highway looked like every other stretch of Route 9, undistinguished, marked with nothing, the kind of road that accumulated events and gave no indication of them. Ethan knew the approximate mile marker from memory. He'd driven it twice after the accident, in the weeks after, before he'd let the whole thing quiet into hope. He pulled off at the shoulder. The drainage ditch was still there, deeper than he remembered, or the same depth than he'd just been 22 the last time he'd stood over it. The embankment had been shored up at some point, concrete reinforcement below the guardrail that hadn't been there before. Sometime in 10 years, someone had decided this stretch of road was a hazard and fixed it. He thought about the timing of things. Victoria stood next to him at the guardrail and looked down at the ditch and didn't say anything for a while. The late afternoon was cold and clear, and the light was going sideways the way November light went, and the cars on Route 9 moved past with the complete indifference of traffic to everything happening at its margins. "This is smaller than I remember," she said. "Same. I remember it being enormous, like falling off a cliff." She looked at it. "It's a ditch." "You were 19 and it was full of water in the dark," he said. "Your brain measured it differently." "My brain measured everything differently that night." She was quiet for a moment. "I haven't been back. Not once." "Was it hard to come?" She thought about it honestly. "Less than I expected. More than zero." She paused. "It feels like someone else's place now. I remember it belonging to me in a very specific way. This location was part of my interior map, the place where I almost stopped. And now I'm standing here and it's just a ditch next to a highway. That's what recovery looks like, I think," he said. "The place stops being yours. It stops having charge." "You're very calm about things," she said. "Do you know that?" "You've mentioned it. It used to bother me," she said. "I thought it meant you weren't feeling it. And now?" "Now I understand it's just a different architecture." She looked at him. "You feel it. You just build around it instead of through it." He considered that. "That might be the most accurate thing anyone's ever said about me. I've had time to study you." "How am I doing?" She looked at the ditch, then back at him. "You're the best thing that's come out of the worst night of my life," she said. "By a considerable margin." He didn't have an answer for that. He didn't need one. He took her hand, and they stood at the guardrail in the November cold, and the cars went past without stopping, and the ditch was just a ditch, and whatever it had been for both of them separately, the place where she'd almost ended and he'd carried the memory of a stranger's hand for years, it was theirs together now. And together changed the weight of it into something bearable, and then into something more than that. They drove home as the dark came in. She slept most of the way back, which she did when she was finally, completely exhausted, in the way she usually wouldn't allow herself to be. He drove in the quiet, and thought about how the particular mercy of a life is that you can't see the whole of it from any point within it. You can only see what's in front of you and what's just behind, and you navigate by that partial information, and most of the time that's enough. He'd been 22 in a storm on a bad road, and he'd stopped, and he'd held a stranger's hand and said things that came from nowhere in particular, and he'd had no idea that anything about it mattered beyond the immediate fact of a person who needed help. The immediate fact of a person who needed help. That was all it was. That was everything it was. The news came in February, 14 months after the wedding. Victoria had been quieter than usual for about a week. Not withdrawn, just interior, thinking about something she hadn't put into words yet. Ethan noticed and gave her room, which was the thing she needed and the thing he'd learned to give. She'd come to him when she was ready. She came to him on a Tuesday evening, sitting at the kitchen table after Emma had gone to bed, with a look on her face that he couldn't immediately categorize. "I need to tell you something," she said. He sat down. "Okay." "I went to the doctor today." She paused. "I'm pregnant." The kitchen was very quiet. His first thought was not a sentence. It was more like a chord. Several things sounding at once, none of them separable in the moment. He looked at her across the table. Her hands were folded in front of her, and she was watching him with the particular attention of someone who needed to know how the information was landing. "Are you okay?" he said. "Physically, yes. Emotionally?" She exhaled. "I didn't plan this. I want you to know that. I wasn't calculating toward this outcome. I know that. I didn't know how I felt about having children," she said. I told you that early on. I meant it. I'm not entirely sure what I feel right now. She looked at him directly. But I want to know what you feel before I figure out the rest. He took her hands across the table. I feel like our family just got larger, he said. She looked at him. That's it, he said. That's the whole thing. She held his gaze for a long moment, then something in her face let go. Some last structural support she'd been holding up against an outcome she wasn't sure of, releasing because the ground had held. Okay, she said. Her voice had a crack in it she didn't try to hide. Okay. Are you scared? He said. Profoundly, she said. You? He thought about it honestly, the way she'd always required and he'd always tried to give. Not of this, he said. Of doing it wrong sometimes, but not of this. She nodded. He held her hands, and the kitchen was quiet, and the house made its settling sounds around them. The particular sound of a place that was new enough to still be adjusting to being lived in. Telling Emma took 2 days of thinking and one direct conversation. They sat together, all three of them, at the kitchen table on a Saturday morning, which was Emma's clearest time, the time she was most herself without the accumulated fatigue of a school week. Ethan told her plainly, Victoria was going to have a baby. They were going to have a baby. Emma sat with this. She looked at the table. She looked at Victoria. She looked at Ethan. Is it a girl or a boy? She said. We don't know yet, Victoria said. Emma nodded slowly. She turned her orange juice glass in her hands. Then, I've been thinking about what it would be like to not be an only child. Ethan and Victoria both looked at her. I've been thinking about it for a while, Emma said. Since you got married. She looked at Victoria. Not hoping for it, just thinking about what it would be like. And, Victoria said. Emma considered. I think I'd be good at it, she said. Being a big sister. What? She said it without arrogance, as an honest assessment of her own capacities. I know a lot of things. I could teach them. You could teach them about turtles, Ethan said. That's the obvious thing, yes. Emma looked at him with the look that meant she had already thought of this and had moved on. But also other things. How to read a diagram, how to make the cranberry sauce properly. She paused. How to tell when Dad's distracted. I'm not that easy to read, Ethan said. Both of them looked at him. Okay, he said. Emma turned back to her orange juice with the satisfied expression of someone whose position has been validated. Can I come to the doctor's appointment when you find out what it is? Victoria looked at Ethan. He looked at her. Yes, Victoria said, if you want to be there. I want to be there, Emma said. Simply, completely. The pregnancy was not graceful. Victoria, who applied precision to everything, found herself in the position of a person whose body was making decisions without consulting the management team. She was exhausted in the first trimester in a way that she found offensive, practically speaking. She didn't have time to be exhausted, and exhaustion didn't respond to scheduling, which was a fundamental design flaw she complained about with great specificity. She had opinions about her symptoms. She expressed those opinions to Ethan at length, which he received with the straight face of a man who had been through a pregnancy once before, and understood that the opinions were not requests for solutions, but declarations of situation. You're doing that thing, she said once, at about 11 weeks, lying on the couch with her feet on his lap. Which thing? The thing where you already know what I'm going to say, and you're just waiting for me to say it. I've learned not to finish your sentences. Smart of you. She put her arm over her eyes. I'm not good at this. At being pregnant? At not being in control of my own body. She lowered her arm. It's a strange thing. I know what's happening scientifically. I understand the biology, and none of that helps. No, he said. It doesn't. Did Sarah... She stopped, started again. Sorry. Is it okay to ask that? Yes, he said. Always. Did Sarah complain? He thought about Sarah in the first trimester of Emma, how she'd been exhausted and furious about the exhaustion in almost exactly this way, how she'd called it a betrayal of her own nervous system, how she'd made him go out at 10:30 at night for specific crackers because those crackers specifically were the only tolerable thing. Constantly, he said. And specifically. You remind me of her in that way. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Is that okay? Yeah, he said. It's more than okay. She put her arm back over her eyes. He kept his hand on her feet. The house was quiet in the middle of the afternoon, and Emma was at school, and the backyard still needed work, and there was a cabinet in the hallway that still hung wrong, and he kept meaning to fix it. Ethan, she said without moving the arm. You're good at this, she said. The actual thing, the being here. I know, he said, not modestly, because she wasn't asking for modesty. I don't say it enough. You say it in your own way, he said. I can read it. You can read most things. Construction training, he said. You learn to read what's actually there instead of what's supposed to be there. She made a sound that was half laugh, half exhaustion. I'm going to sleep for 20 minutes. Okay. Wake me up if Emma gets home early. I will. She was asleep in 4 minutes. He sat on the couch with her feet in his lap, and a project report he wasn't reading, and the particular quiet of a house that had people in it and might soon have more. But their daughter was born in September, on a Wednesday, at 4 in the morning, which was inconvenient for everyone and entirely her own schedule. They named her Iris. Ethan had suggested it because Emma had a book about wildflowers that she'd consulted with great seriousness, and the Iris page had a note in Emma's handwriting that said good name in the margin, which neither he nor Victoria mentioned, but both of them had seen. Victoria held Iris in the hospital room at 4:30 in the morning and looked at her with an expression that Ethan had never seen on Victoria Sterling's face before. Not controlled, not assessed, just open. Fully and completely open. Like someone who had gone somewhere there was no managing and had arrived and found it wasn't as dangerous as the approach had suggested. She's very small, Victoria said. They start that way, Ethan said. I know that. She didn't look up. She's still very small. A pause. She looks angry. Emma looked angry for the first 3 days, he said. Then she looked confused for about 2 weeks. Then she figured it out. Victoria glanced at him. Did Emma figure it out, or did you? He thought about it. Both of us, he said, at the same time. We just didn't know that's what was happening. Emma had been allowed to stay in the waiting room through the night, Mrs. Kowalski with her, both of them asleep in the vinyl chairs when Ethan came out at 5:30 to tell them. Emma woke up immediately, the way she woke from everything, all at once. Ethan told her. Emma stood up from the chair, straightened her jacket, and said, Can I meet her? She could. Emma stood at the hospital bassinet and looked at Iris for a long time, not performing response, actually looking, taking the person in. Finally, she said to Iris, quietly but not privately, I'm your sister. I'm going to teach you a lot of things. You don't have to be scared. Victoria looked at Ethan over Emma's head. He looked back. Neither of them had anything to add. 3 years later, on a Saturday in June, they went back to the park. Emma was 10, serious in new ways that her 7-year-old self hadn't yet discovered, with a notebook she carried everywhere now for things she wanted to remember. Iris was almost 3, a state of being she had committed to with an intensity that surprised everyone who expected a second child to be the calmer one. She was not the calmer one. She was loud and specific and had very strong opinions about shoes and frequently needed to be talked down from positions she'd taken on limited information, and Emma handled most of this with a patience and a clarity that made Ethan think Sarah would have recognized something in it. They walked to the fountain, the same East Plaza, the same iron bench with the green paint slightly newer than Ethan remembered. The hot dog cart was still there. The pigeons were still unreasonably confident about the available territory. Ethan sat on the bench. Victoria sat next to him. Iris climbed up between them with no ceremony and made herself comfortable. Emma stood at the fountain's edge and looked at the water with the expression of someone taking an inventory. It's the same bench, Emma said. The same one, Ethan confirmed. You fixed her shoe here, Emma said. She'd heard this story. She had asked for it at various times in various versions, wanting to understand the sequence. You were late to pick me up. 6 minutes late, Ethan said. I remember, Emma said, without heat. Priya gave me the look. Priya gave everyone the look, he said. It was her primary form of communication. Emma looked at the bench, at Iris, who was attempting to eat a cracker she'd produced from somewhere, at Victoria, who was watching the fountain with the slight private look she got when she was content, not performing contentment, but actually in it. If you hadn't stopped, Emma said to Ethan, working through the sequence aloud. If you'd kept going, then nothing would have happened the way it happened, Ethan said. She would have fixed her own shoe. Eventually, he said, maybe. And you wouldn't have found each other. Not that day. Emma thought about this. She was 10, and she was a person who understood that the world had mechanisms she couldn't fully see, that things connected in ways that weren't visible from inside them. She'd understood this in the way kids understand things they can't entirely articulate, as a texture of experience, a thing they know in the body before they have language for it. Do you think things happen for a reason? She asked. Ethan considered it. He was not a man given to easy answers on difficult questions, and Emma had never been a child who accepted them. I think things happen, he said, and then we decide what they mean. And sometimes what we decide they mean is so true and so useful that it makes them feel like they were always going toward that meaning. He paused, which might be the same as them happening for a reason, or it might not. I'm not sure it matters which. Emma looked at him. That's not a simple answer. No, he said, it's not. She accepted this, looked back at the fountain. I think you stopping was the reason, she said. I think that was the whole thing, just that one decision. He looked at his oldest daughter at the fountain's edge, and at his wife with their youngest between them on a bench in a park on a June afternoon. And he thought about a 22-year-old in a storm on a bad road who'd had no category for what he was doing. Beyond this person needs help, and I am here. No calculation, no plan, just presence, and a door that gave enough to get an arm through, and the words that came when words were needed. That was the whole thing. Emma was right. It really was just that one decision, and everything else was what grew from it. All the grief and the joy and the friction and the compromised mornings and the window left open on dry nights and the turtles with their names and a woman who'd spent 10 years looking and found what she was looking for on a bench 6 minutes after he should have already gone. He thought about what he would tell someone, if he could tell someone anything, not wisdom. He didn't trust the word, it was too self-satisfied, but something honest, something that came from the actual shape of the years rather than from how he wished they'd looked. He'd say, stop for the person at the side of the road. Not because something good will come of it, it might not. That can't be the reason. Stop because someone needs help and you're there, and those two facts together create an obligation that's bigger than your schedule. Stop because the world runs on the accumulated weight of small decisions made in the direction of other people, and you don't get to see the math of it, but you're always contributing to it one way or another, and it matters which direction you're adding. He'd say, the life you can imagine for yourself is always smaller than the life available to you, because imagination works from what you already know. What arrived for Ethan Cross? The ring on a cold porch, the morning at a lake, the sister who taught the younger one not to be scared, the voice reading Gerald right. None of it was in any version of the future he'd been able to see from inside the years it was built from. He'd say, let the thing be what it is. Don't make it smaller by trying to manage it. Don't make it safer by keeping it at arm's length. The risk of loving something that can be lost is the price of having it, and the price is always worth it. Always. He'd say that clearly, without hedging, from the evidence of his own life. Iris finished the cracker and reached up to grab a fistful of Victoria's jacket, which Victoria accepted without looking down, reaching automatically to stabilize her daughter's grip the way you reach for things you've done 1,000 times and don't need to think about anymore. Emma came back from the fountain and sat on the bench on Ethan's other side, opening her notebook. I'm going to write this down, she said. What? Ethan asked. The date, that we came back. She was already writing. And what you said about decisions. Which part? The whole thing. She kept writing. I don't want to forget the exact words. He let her write. The fountain did its thing. The city moved around them the way it always moved, indifferent to the specific weight of what was happening on this particular bench. The way cities are always indifferent and always the backdrop for everything that matters. Pigeons negotiated. A vendor argued about change. Somewhere a child was trying to get a parent to stay longer. Ethan Cross sat in the June afternoon with his family around him and his daughter, writing down words she didn't want to forget. And he felt the full specific weight of a life that had not been planned, but had been built. Piece by piece, decision by decision, in the direction of other people. And he found it was exactly enough. More than enough. It was, in fact, everything.